Our piece begins intensely, with an insane battle between a woman dressed as a maid and a blonde man, who are fighting a minotaur. Suddenly, the minotaur tries to attack a white-haired child. The maid asks the child to dodge the attack. The child then conjures up an ice attack and asks if they were talking to him. He then throws a spear of ice, piercing the giant minotaur. The boy comments that the battle was very easy for him. The maid asks if Mr. Kyle is hurt, while Leon, the blonde man, also asks if he's all right. The little boy, called Kyle, replies that everything is fine and that Leon is worrying for nothing, asking him if he doesn't trust his abilities. However, Kyle thinks to himself that it's hard to believe in his own strength at that moment, since even he didn't believe in it. He remembers that, just a few months ago, he was just a spoiled child called Kyle Seltarian, facing imminent death. Then the narrative returns to 3 months ago, in the annex of the Marquisate of Seltarian. We see some maids talking. One of them comments that she couldn't stand it any longer because young Lord Kyle shouted again and got angry. Another mentions that he started throwing things at her and that her arm was swollen after being hit. They wonder what to do, as they still have to bring him meals and medicine, even though he won't eat and is still very angry, throwing things and asking for wine. One of the maids suggests that he could be the son of a mistress, since it seems impossible that someone like that could have come out of such a respectable marquise. While they are talking, a young maid called Urgel decides to take the tray up to Kyle's room, the young master. The others are surprised, as this is the first time she has offered to do anything. Urgel enters the room, which is completely messy, with lots of broken objects. As she begins to clean up, Kyle wakes up and grabs her wrist. Seeing her, he wonders who she is. Urgel introduces herself and apologizes for having entered the room without permission, thinking he was asleep. He lets her go and apologizes, while Urgel says that everything is fine. Kyle then gets up with difficulty and, looking in the mirror, is startled. He can't believe his eyes, because that face was a character from a game he used to play. Kyle, who used to be Lee Hyun-woo, a gamer and streamer, realizes that he has been reincarnated as Kyle Seltarian, a character from the virtual reality game Fantasy Defense. He is horrified to discover that he is now Kyle Seltarian, the youngest son of the Seltarian family, well-known swordsman. Kyle is an insignificant character in the game, defeated with a single blow by a minion monster summoned by a villain. Desperate, Kyle tries to pinch himself and slap his face to wake up, but nothing happens. Kyle thinks that when he pinches his cheek and feels the pain, he realizes that it's not a dream. He really has been reincarnated in that body. He continues to wonder how all this could have happened. Lee Hyun-woo, the #1 ranked fantasy defense player in the world, is now just an insignificant, worthless character. Next, the context of Fantasy Defense, a virtual reality game that became a worldwide hit in 2030, is explained. Although the game's levels are extremely difficult, no one has managed to complete it, not even after 10 years. However, its diabolical and addictive fun still attracts players, increasing its popularity. Scores are awarded based on play style and mission achievements on a global rating scale, and scores increase significantly when rare missions or items are obtained. Lee Hyun-woo was the person who invested 10 years of his life in Fantasy Defense, getting to know rare magic circles and legendary formulas that others didn't, becoming a veritable living dictionary of the game. He reached the global #1 ranking. Now he finds himself possessed by Kyle Seltarian, a useless character. Fantasy Defense is a game where, even with protagonists endowed with exceptional talents, it is difficult to survive. And Kyle Seltarian, a character Lee Hyun-woo knew well, has a cruel and inevitable fate. The ultimate goal of Fantasy Defense is to stop the forces of darkness. The person responsible for summoning these dark forces was Adolphe, the second son of the Seltarian family, who used the powers of darkness to start a rebellion, and so the Seltarian estate fell into ruin, becoming a base for the evil forces that wish to dominate human territories. In the midst of this chaos, Kyle Seltarian, a talentless incompetent, has been killed. Lee Hyun-woo, now in Kyle's body, thinks that perhaps, if he flees the estate before the rebellion begins, he can avoid this fate. However, he soon realizes that the real problem lies in the disease Kyle suffers from, called Emirian. This disease blocks the body's mana pathways. In a world where mana is the source of aura and magic, essential for survival, those who contract this disease have their mana pathways blocked, preventing them from absorbing nutrients essential for life. Death usually occurs before the age of 20. The only treatment for Emirian is to absorb mana from the natural environment, but with the pathways blocked, this is impossible. Being diagnosed with this disease is like receiving a death sentence. Kyle Seltarian was diagnosed with this terminal illness at a young age, and it drove him to despair. He fears death and is consumed by the anxiety of having a limited time to live, as well as the despair of not being able to do anything to change it. Kyle remembers his father telling him to stay in his room and reflect on his actions, after being confined by order of the head of the family. In his isolation, Kyle ended up becoming distorted and unbalanced, being seen as a disgrace to his family. The protagonist, now in Kyle's body, realizes how hopeless the character was. Even though the situation is regrettable, he admits that Kyle's terrible personality makes it difficult to sympathize with him. Now he has to assess his situation again. Kyle Seltarian, the youngest son of the Seltarian family, is trapped in a weakened body, with no talent for swords or magic, a short life ahead of him, a bad reputation, and confined by his own father. With no talents, no skills, and no options, the protagonist thinks he's ruined. He wonders how he can survive in this world with no stats or special abilities, wondering if he shouldn't have gained at least 1 or 2 cheat skills by being possessed by this body. Just as you're thinking about it, a blue light begins to emit, suggesting a new possibility. Kyle wondered what it was. He saw little blue balls floating in front of him and, curious, he touched one of them, saying that not long ago there was nothing of the sort. When he pressed one of the blue balls, a system suddenly appeared in front of him, informing him that he had awakened and received 2 new talents. The status window was unlocked, and he could now use the mind's eye. The system explained that the mind's eye would be activated automatically. Kyle, excited, said that his system window had finally appeared. He went to check which 2 talents he had received, mind's eye and mana paths. He understood that the mind's eye allowed him to see detailed specifications, but he wondered what this paths of mana was, since he had never seen such a talent before. From the name, it seemed to be related to magic, but he wondered if the best magical talent shouldn't be the mana companion. However, his intuition told him that paths of mana was even more extraordinary, a first-rate talent. He remembered that, even though he had the mana companion, he had never seen anything like it. This was pure mana energy itself, and now he could absorb it properly. Touching one of the blue balls again, Kyle felt the mana flowing through his entire arm and realized that, at last, mana was circulating through his body. He also realized that one of the symptoms of the disease, which blocked the mana pathways, was beginning to dissipate. With this, Kyle began to experiment, giving mental commands for the mana to move and become as sharp as a needle. To his surprise, it worked, and the mana began to flow through his body, although it was still blocked in some areas, such as his elbows. He thought that if he kept collecting mana in this way, he might even overcome his illness. With this, he began to see himself in a much more optimistic scenario, believing that this time he wouldn't die. The scene shifted to Urgel, who was saying that the food was ready. She was hurrying to get the meal to Kyle before it got cold, but the other maids interrupted her. They asked her to wait and told her not to give the food to Kyle. One of them suggested that, as a protest against Kyle's mistreatment, they should decide to stop serving him temporarily, in the hope that, after starving for a few days, he would change his mind. They suggested that Urgel pour the soup, but she refused, saying that they would do whatever they wanted, but that she would do her job. One of the maids angrily slapped Urgel's hand, knocking the food to the floor. Another asked if Urgel still thought he was noble, even though he came from a ruined family and had been sold into slavery. She told Urgel not to be arrogant, but Urgel paid no attention to her provocations, which irritated the others even more. One of them raised her hand to hit Urgel, asking if she would continue to ignore them, when suddenly Leon appeared, asking what was going on. The woman questioned why Leon Hard was in the kitchen, and he asked if the food on the floor was for Kyle. Annoyed, Leon commented that they had been doing a lot of work lately, and that the meal was being served too late. He then asked Urgel to prepare another meal and take it immediately to Kyle. Urgel went into the kitchen to make another meal, while Leon observed the situation. Back in the protagonist's room, Kyle was studying his new abilities. He concluded that if he used these 2 talents, he could change the fate of his family, which was destined to fall. With 10 years' experience in fantasy defense and a vast knowledge of advanced strategies, as well as being born into a family of great power and wealth, Kyle believed he could even stop the forces of darkness. Kyle knew there were 3 big things he needed to do now. The first, clearly, was to cure his illness by opening the mana pathways and learning magic. Kyle comments that the Path of Mana is a talent specialized in magic, so it's obviously better to become a mage than a knight. Secondly, he needs to stop the fall of the Marcus family. If the family is doing well, so is he, and the Marquis of Selton will be a very solid support for him in terms of reputation, skill, wealth, and everything else. As the territory is located on the outskirts, they won't have to worry so much about the situation in the capital. The third and most important point is to gather talent to prepare for the massive attack by the forces of darkness expected in the coming years. If he selects potential talents and attracts people to his side, this will give him great power. He decides that this is how he will build his strength and, for sure, survive. Cal then thinks that, to gather talents, he should start with Leon Hard, since he was a very useful tank NPC. Just then, Urgel enters the room, bringing her meal. Cal vaguely remembers who she is, but tries to recall her name. Suddenly, the system appears in front of him, activating the mind's eye. He realizes that the mind's eye allows him to see detailed information about other people, including their talents. By using the mind's eye on Urgel, Cal discovers that she possesses the talent Eternal Friend of Spirits, a very high-level skill in the spirit magic category. Urgel's characteristics include a cold heart and being extremely hardworking. Her favorability towards Kyle was 30. He was surprised by her talent, wondering how a girl with so much potential could be working as a maid. The scene shifts to a year earlier, where a man is conducting a slave auction. He announces that they have a special and rare item, a girl, the third daughter of Baron Helene, whose title had been stripped. Her name was Urgel, an educated and intelligent young noblewoman. This surprises the buyers, and the bids start to rise. 50 gold, 70 gold, 90 gold. Leon suggested that Kyle leave, as he couldn't stand that kind of auction any longer. However, Kyle surprises everyone by offering 300 gold for Urgel, leaving even Leon impressed. The auctioneer asks if anyone wants to bid more, and Leon asks if Kyle really wants to buy slaves. Kyle, annoyed, says that it doesn't matter, because his father doesn't care what he does anymore. So Urgel is sold for 300 gold to Kyle. Later, Kyle addresses Urgel, taking off her chains and telling her that she was free and no longer a slave. He frees her, saying that she can go wherever she wants. However, Urgel replies that she wants to stay with him, and Kyle, surprised, says that she can do whatever she wants. Kyle, recalling these past memories, realizes that it was he, or rather the old Kyle Seltarian, who brought Urgel into the Marquis's household. After the family collapsed, Urgel was almost sold into slavery again. He feels the emotions of the old Kyle, who was full of sympathy for Urgel, a feeling of shared destiny between two people abandoned in a cruel world. As Kyle eats the meal that Urgel has prepared, he feels extremely happy and asks her if she made it. She returns, asking if there was anything wrong with the food, but he compliments her, saying that it was delicious and that she really was an excellent cook. He smilingly asks her to prepare another meal for him in the future. The system then informs him that her favorability has risen to 35. Kyle thinks that, considering their dramatic encounter, affection wasn't that high, and that it's almost a miracle there's any affection left in her, considering all the delinquent behavior of the old Kyle. He also reflects that, in the fantasy defense game, there was no spirit summoning NPC called Urgel, which intrigues him. Kyle thinks that Urgel probably, without being able to fully flourish as a summoner of spirits, got caught up in the Marques's internal rebellion and lost her life. But this time, he says there's no way he's going to let that happen, and he's not going to let this jewel slip away, now that it's right in front of him. He then asks her if she has ever thought of learning to summon spirits. Urgel wonders about this, and Kyle comments that he thinks she might have an incredible talent for this art. Urgel reflects for a moment and replies that she never imagined she had a talent for summoning spirits. Kyle thinks that, even though she was exposed to this type of magic in the main house, he knows that education in spirit magic is very expensive, something that a family of low nobility couldn't afford. It seems that, despite having lived in the main house, Urgel was not exposed to this education. Kyle then says that, if she really means it, she should start considering this possibility, as she will now learn to summon spirits. He reinforces that she has no choice, as she must follow what he says, since she belongs to him. Her favorability rises to 50. The scene changes to a few days later, and Kyle is facing Leon Hart. Kyle warns him that he's going to leave the room, but Leon Hart replies that he can't leave. Angrily, Kyle asks if Leon Hart is saying that he will have to be confined forever. Leon Hart reminds him that Kyle can't leave until Lord Rampton gives permission, or has he forgotten his orders? Kyle remembers that he was confined because the Marquis of Seltarian, Rampton, couldn't stand his problematic attitudes any longer, but now there's no time to lose. Kyle sees the mana particles in the air and comments that, ever since he discovered he could unlock his mana pad, paths. He has been absorbing mana from the room every day. Although this isn't enough to unlock the paths instantly like on the first day, the mana has been accumulating in his body like experience points in a game, and his physical condition is gradually improving. However, this is still not enough to completely cure his illness, and he urgently needs to go out to gather more mana. Kyle says he's not going too far, he just needs a walk to get some exercise. Leonhardt comments that it's the first time he's heard such a constructive justification from Kyle. Leonhardt, who has served as his knight for years, has never heard anything like it. Kyle realizes that the body of his former self has lived as a delinquent all his life, so he really has no credibility with Leonhardt, and that he didn't expect the knight to be such a difficult barrier to overcome. Kyle then thinks that Leonhardt, currently his personal guard, was a very famous character in fantasy defense, both in defense and offense, and highly qualified with great potential. He could have been promoted to captain and, in the original game, ended up becoming a knight-errant after the fall of House Soltarian. Players could recruit him through events. But for now, since the Second Son's rebellion hasn't happened yet, Leonhardt is still in the Soltarian mansion. Kyle thinks it's a waste of talent to see Leonhardt stuck looking after a delinquent like him, and wonders what the Knights of House Soltarian were doing. He then asks why on earth Leonhardt was stuck in a place like that. Leonhardt asks if Kyle is unhappy about him being his guard, and his favorability drops to -60, which worries Kyle. Kyle tries to smooth things over, saying that he's not unhappy with Leonhardt, but that he thinks he's too good for the job. Leonhardt asks him to simply follow Lord Rampton's orders. Kyle realizes that Leonhardt's loyalties lie not with him, but with Rampton Soltarian, which makes sense, considering that there is no future in supporting his youngest, delinquent son. But Kyle knows he can't leave it at that. He then tells Leonhardt that he needs to persuade his father. Leonhardt reflects that Kyle's behavior is really different. Kyle says that once he has attracted Rampton's attention, Leonhardt will be his. He asks Leonhardt if he will help him, and Leonhardt, intrigued, wonders what Kyle's plan is. Kyle says that he wasn't planning anything at all and thinks that Leonhardt didn't really trust him. Kyle comments that, after being confined to his room for so long, his thoughts have changed and he has decided that he wants to live a long life. Leonhardt, surprised, wondered if Kyle really wanted to live longer, something surprising for someone who had given up everything because of an incurable disease. It was hard for him to believe, since Kyle wouldn't live more than 20 years. He had no magic, talent, or swordsmanship. What's more, as the youngest son in the family, he had no chance of inheriting the title. Even so, Kyle wanted to keep Leonhardt by his side, as he would be an important figure in any decision he made. Leonhardt, upon hearing this, thinks that it is a great honor for someone from the Order of the Knights of Soltarian to protect a direct descendant of the Marcus family. He bows, promising to fulfill his duties faithfully. Kyle knew that Leonhardt was an extremely loyal man, and that was exactly why he wanted him by his side. As Leonhardt reflected, the head of the family, Rampton Soltarian, asked Leonhardt to take good care of Kyle, because within the family there was no one he could trust to protect him, except Leonhardt. Leonhardt knew that if Kyle really wanted to live longer, he needed to be healthier, which meant exercising outdoors. Leonhardt suggested that if Kyle told his father this, he might understand. Kyle, happy, believes he could leave now, but Leonhardt stops him, saying that he could exercise inside the mansion. Kyle, frustrated, asks if Leonhardt would really be that stubborn. Kyle insists, saying that he needs to go out to find more mana cores. Leonhardt, noticing the change in Kyle's aura, commented that there was something really different about him, but he still wouldn't change his mind. Marquez's orders were absolute, and that applied to Leonhardt too. He challenged Kyle, saying that if he really wanted to leave, he would have to go through him first. Kyle notices Leonhardt's killing intent and wonders if that knight would really kill a child. If he were an ordinary 13-year-old boy, he would be terrified, but instead Kyle touches Leonhardt's shoulder, tells him to keep his word and walks past him without caring. Leonhardt is surprised to see Kyle walking past him. Kyle, with a smile, asks how Leonhardt was feeling now that he had made it out. The scene changes to outside. Kyle, breathing in the fresh air, comments that it was very comforting and refreshing. He wondered how long it had been since he had left his room. Even if it was only the garden near the annex, the feeling of freedom was incredible, and the night sky looked more beautiful than ever. Mana particles were everywhere, and he felt he could absorb them all right now. Leonhardt, watching, was surprised to see how happy Kyle was just to leave home, remembering that he was still a child. However, he also wondered how Kyle, who had never trained mana or aura, could cope with so much pressure. Kyle, on the other hand, thinks that Leonhardt was still shocked by what had happened before, and he had every reason to be. Kyle knew that the reason he had managed to resist Leonhardt's evil intent to kill was simple. Physically, he might be a noble 13-year-old boy who had never been in a fight, but mentally, he was a veteran who had survived countless virtual wars. After 10 years of playing fantasy defense, a game known for its realistic depictions of life and death, Kyle had become accustomed to death, experiencing horrific scenarios, piles of corpses, and being drenched in blood. For him, a simple threat of death was nothing. Kyle thinks that was enough to unlock more mana channels. Leonhardt comments that he's going to ask for punishment for his own actions because, although he was following orders from the Marquez, he thinks it was wrong to direct his killing intent towards someone he served. Kyle, for his part, says that if Leonhardt insists on telling his father about it, he should add that Kyle doesn't want Leonhardt to be punished. When Leonhardt presents this to Rampton Saltarian, the head of the family asks if it was true that Kyle really did ask him not to punish his subordinate, and if he should believe it. Leonhardt confirms the veracity of his words, but Rampton says he still has doubts. Leonhardt admits that he himself had difficulty believing what he saw, especially when Kyle calmly confronted his intent to kill. Rampton reflects that for Kyle to have resisted the killing intent of such a skilled knight, he must be hiding something. He then asks what Kyle did in the garden. Leonhardt replies that he simply started meditating. Surprised, Rampton asks how Kyle learned to meditate. Leonhardt explains that, as a young man, Kyle was briefly instructed in the swordsman's arts by the Duke, his father, and learned to meditate at that time. However, Kyle comments that he had no talent and quickly gave up. Kyle then asks Leonhardt to keep everyone away during his meditations, as any distraction could impair his concentration. Leonhardt tells him that Kyle meditated for 6 uninterrupted hours, which surprises Rampton even more. He expected Kyle not to last even 6 minutes, let alone 6 hours. Rampton remembers trying to teach Kyle the arts of swordsmanship when he was young. As a descendant of the Saltarian family, he should at least be able to follow the path of the swordsman and inherit the family's sacred techniques. However, Kyle couldn't stand the training, falling to his knees and saying that his legs couldn't take it anymore. Rampton shouted at him to get up, as there had never been such a weak descendant in the family. He then concluded that Kyle didn't have the talent to be a swordsman, lacking tenacity and patience. But now, the fact that Kyle has been meditating for 6 hours makes him wonder what happened to him. Rampton asks if Kyle hit his head or if something happened. Leonhardt checks and confirms that there was nothing wrong with Kyle's food or head. It was clear that something had changed in him, not only his attitude towards combat and danger, but also the way he looked at others, especially Leonhardt. Rampton concludes that Kyle is maturing, which is no bad thing. He asks Leonhardt to put the matter aside and continue looking after Kyle from now on. Leonhardt agrees. Back in his room, Kyle is meditating again, and the system informs him that his mana is overflowing and his spiritual vision has been enhanced. He can now better assess the state of his body. Upon analysis, he realizes that only his arm is in good condition, while the rest of his body is in critical condition. Kyle then asks the system to unblock all the mana paths to his heart. The mana flows down his arm, through his shoulder, down his spine, and into his heart. The system confirms that he has unblocked the pathways to the heart, and the characteristics of his body with blocked pathways are weakened. Kyle, happy, realizes that he can now use magic. He explains that, in this world, in order to use magic, it is necessary to form a circle of mana near the heart. To master high-level magic, you need to increase the number of circles, which takes time. Normally, magic training begins between the ages of 5 and 8, and by the age of 12 you should have formed at least one circle to be assessed as a potential magician. Considering that Kyle is 13, he thinks it's a bit late to start learning magic if he were an ordinary NPC. However, with the mana adaptation talent and having freed the pathways to the heart, he is in a good position to learn magic properly. Now, he needs to form the first circle of mana. Kyle wonders how to form this circle and decides to apply what he has learned in the game. Suddenly, Leonhardt knocks on the door. Kyle, surprised, opens the door and hears Leonhardt say that his father has lifted the restrictions, but on the condition that Leonhardt accompanies him wherever he goes, even out of his room or for a walk in the garden. However, he still can't leave the property. Kyle is very happy about this situation. Kyle thinks that going out into the garden was a real blessing, and he feels very grateful for it. He believes that Leonhardt did a good job of convincing the Duke, and that it was a great decision to persuade him first. Leonhardt's favorability now stands at +20. However, Kyle wonders why his favorability has increased. He remembers that when he repelled the killing intent, his favorability was at -50, and he wonders if Leonhardt was moved by seeing him meditate all night. That time, he meditated for 6 hours before passing out, and Kyle wonders if Leonhardt is the kind of person who is impressed by sweat and tears. Kyle tells Leonhardt that it was a good time, as he needed to go somewhere. Leonhardt asks where, and Kyle just tells him to follow him. They arrive at another location, where a woman is very surprised to see Kyle. Desperate, she runs up to Leonhardt, asking what's going on. She remembers that Kyle had been banned from entering the library. Leonhardt explains that the head of the family has lifted the restrictions. The woman, crying, asks how this was possible, as she remembers when Kyle destroyed several rare books, tearing out precious pages and saying that they were just worthless pieces of paper, since everything would be useless when he died. For this, he was banned from the library. Kyle wonders if it really happened, and suddenly the memory comes back to him. He then explains that he was there to read, specifically about magic, and asks if there are any books on the subject. The woman replies that they only have introductory level books on magic, since the family has always emphasized the swordsman's arts. Kyle says that's enough and asks for books that explain how to form circles of mana. He reflects that mana is the force that created everything, a supernatural energy, and recalls that this was defined by the school of Joshua Alengrang, associated with the birth story of this legendary magician. While reading the introductory book, Kyle wondered why it was so complicated. He finds the content almost like a university thesis and wonders if 7-year-olds can really understand it. Normally, in a game, a status window would appear automatically, making it easier to learn, and he wonders if he really has to read it all. Suddenly, his system is activated, along with his spiritual vision. The system informs him that this is a low-level book and begins to translate the text. After translating 100% of the content, Kyle is impressed by his ability and wonders if the spirit vision can also translate other information. He is very happy, as he will now be able to decode information and skills more easily, saving time. Kyle asks for more beginner's books on mana circles, saying he'll borrow them all. The scene changes to Leonhardt taking the books Kyle asked for, and Kyle thanks him. Leonhardt, concerned, asks if Kyle is sure he's right to take so many books at once, commenting that the librarian is also worried. Kyle replies that she doesn't need to worry, because he'll finish them quickly, or maybe he'll lose interest halfway through. Leonhardt, still confused, thinks that Kyle has always hated books and wonders what is happening to him. He notices that one of the books is about the digestion of mana and comments that Hermimum's illness blocks the mana and aura pathways in the body, preventing energy from flowing. Kyle, completing the sentence, says that learning magic will be very difficult and asks if this is what Leonhardt was trying to suggest. Leonhardt replies that his advice was unwelcome and apologizes. Kyle then says that it was actually a valid point. He comments that everyone in that house would probably say the same thing, and that everything he's doing seems eccentric. He recognizes that he's the black sheep of the family, the youngest and most reckless son, and that some of his eccentricities don't surprise anyone else. Kyle thinks that reading books doesn't harm anyone and that, in any case, he knows that Leonhardt was worried about him, afraid that he would fail again and fall into deep despair. As he has already said, Kyle has no intention of dying young. He says he will do everything in his power to reverse his situation. So he lies down on the bed to start reading. Leonhardt thinks back to when he found Kyle kneeling on the floor, crying. On that occasion, Leonhardt asked why he was crying, and Kyle replied that his father had said he didn't need a useless child like him. Leonhardt reflects on how Kyle used to be a crybaby, but now seemed to have changed completely. Kyle is amazed to realize that his affection points have risen to 0. He wonders what he did to suddenly increase them by 30 points, since they were at -30 before. Leonhardt hands Kyle the book, saying that he would wait outside and that if he needed anything, just call him. Kyle wonders if Leonhardt enjoyed seeing him reading or perhaps appreciated his persistence, since reading several books in one go can count as persistence. In any case, with Leonhardt gone, Kyle is finally alone and ready to start reading. The system informs him that acute perception has been activated and the text is being decoded. Kyle starts decoding several books at once and realizes that the decoding speed is dozens of times faster than normal reading. In addition, the most difficult parts of the content are transformed into simpler data. The system warns that the basic principles of circle formation have been stored and that the user's comprehension has increased, speeding up the decoding process. All the books in the area have been decoded decoded. Kyle comments that everything is ready and that it went very quickly. Now he prepares for the next step, forming a mana circle using the decoded data. The system informs him that it is retrieving data on the basic principles of circle formation and that Kyle meets the minimum conditions to form his first circle. Kyle guides the mana along the golden path described in the book and decides to try immediately. The system tells him that the mana is moving along its path. Kyle feels his chest burn near his heart, but he knows he has to endure the pain, otherwise the mana will return and damage his organs. He hangs on, even though it's getting harder and harder to keep control. Finally, the system confirms that Kyle has formed his first circle, and the blocked paths characteristic has been weakened. Mana has become more active, allowing him to refine it within the circle. Kyle celebrates, happy to finally be able to use mana properly. A few hours pass and it's morning. He hears a conversation outside and realizes that it's Leonhardt and Urgel. They seem to be worried about him. Urgel enters the room, bringing breakfast, and is distraught to see Kyle lying on the floor, surrounded by books. She wonders why he is like this, and the scene changes to her presenting him with breakfast. Kyle wonders if she prepared the food herself, as it was incredibly delicious, which was to be expected from Urgel. The scene changes again, and we see Urgel happily carrying Kyle's food. Suddenly, other maids ask if that wasn't Lord Kyle's food and say that they will deliver it. They suggest that Urgel should get some rest, leaving her confused by this sudden offer. The maids say that serving Lord Kyle is Sally's responsibility, and that Urgel is only there temporarily. They comment that Kyle's personality has improved a lot lately and suggest that they should go back to the original arrangement. Urgel replies that she doesn't want to, and that if they have any complaints about her work or want to change anything, they should speak directly to Lord Kyle. One of the maids is irritated by the answer, and another appears in front of Urgel while the first asks if she really thought it was something special. The second woman had a mysterious look on her face. The scene changes, and Urgel manages to take the food to Kyle. She asks if the meal was to his liking, as she tried to adapt the recipe he had taught her last time. Kyle says yes, it was really good, and compliments her cooking skills, which are improving every day. He comments that she has been practicing hard every day and learning new recipes from the head chef, pointing out how diligent and hardworking she is. Kyle asks about her progress with spirit magic. Urgel is confused, and Kyle asks her to bring the book Introduction to Spirit Magic that he had given her earlier. He opens the book and asks how far she's read, to which she replies that she's halfway through. Kyle, looking at the worn pages, realizes that she has indeed studied very carefully. He reflects that, being from a noble family, Urgel had a solid basic education, which meant that her learning speed wasn't slow. In fact, considering her age, she is very talented, and it would be ideal if her skills were developed gradually and over time. However, Kyle comments that, at this rate, it won't be enough as time is running out. He explains that Urgel needs to get stronger as soon as possible, as in 2 months, the Seltarian family will hold an heir succession ceremony, and on that day, a coup led by the second son, Adolphe, will take place at the mansion, resulting in the fall of the Seltarian family. Kyle reveals that, during this coup, Urgel will be caught and lose her life unless she becomes strong enough to defend herself by then. Kyle suggests that Urgel leave the kitchen work to someone else, so that she can concentrate on her magic studies. That would help her concentrate better. He mentions that he'll ask Sally to take over serving him, so Urgel doesn't have to worry about it. Urgel, distressed, begs her to continue working hard at spiritual magic and cooking, promising not to neglect either. She begs not to be replaced and that he please let her continue serving him. Her words, accompanied by tears, leave Kyle very surprised. Kyle reflects on her situation. Her family fell apart in an instant, and she went from a baronet's daughter to a slave, and now a servant. She has lost contact with her family, not knowing if they are alive or dead. It's only natural that she feels insecure. She finally began to adapt to life as a maid, and, now that she had a bit of stability, he sent her to study spiritual magic, which obviously confused her. Being a maid took priority, because Urgel must have thought that if she didn't fulfill her duties well, she could be expelled from the mansion. Kyle realizes that the confusion was his fault for not explaining the situation correctly. He asks her if she remembers why he brought her to the mansion, and she tells him that she belongs to him now. What he really wanted to say was that he never abandons his people. In fact, he always protects those in his charge. Kyle tells Urgel that he didn't instruct her to learn spirit magic for no reason. He admits that she is an excellent maid, with impressive cooking skills, as well as being very diligent and meticulous. If she continues to work hard, she will surely be promoted to head maid. However, He points out that there are many other maids in the mansion, which means that there are several people who could replace her. These words startle Urgel. Kyle then asks her what she thinks will happen if she becomes a spirit mage. He explains that spirit mages are extremely rare and respected, and that she would become a great person above everyone else. He assures her that if she dedicates herself, she will be irreplaceable. He asks her how that sounds to her, if it sounds incredible. Kyle then says that he believes she can become the greatest spirit mage in the world, but that she will need to work very hard to do so. He hands a book to Urgel, who happily accepts the responsibility, saying that he trusts Lord Kyle completely. Her affection for him grows to 60. After that, Kyle appoints Urgel as his personal maid, in charge of taking care of most of his personal affairs. He takes her out of the maid's shared room and gives her a private room. Kyle explains that this will be her room from now on, which leaves her very impressed. He thinks that this new room is better for both her studies and her safety, as well as avoiding conflicts with the other maids. Urgel, thrilled, says that she loves her room, especially because it's so close to Kyle's. He jokes, asking her if that's what she really likes. He jokes, asking if that's really what she liked best, and she confirms that it is. Kyle reflects that he and Urgel will work hard together and survive, no matter what. Later, Urgel sees Kyle passing by the window and greets him, which increases his affection for him even more, now to 65. Suddenly, the scene changes, and one of the maids goes to Adolphe, saying she has a report. After hearing the explanation, Adolphe asks if Kyle has really changed that much, and the maid confirms that he has. She explains that Kyle has been exercising, building his strength and dedicating himself to studying magic. His personality has also improved, and he is no longer agitated or violent with the servants. Adolphe, surprised, comments that his foolish brother has finally matured, and as an older brother, he thinks it's time to pay him a visit. The scene changes again, and Kyle asks Leonhardt to take him somewhere large and secluded, out of sight of other people. Leonhardt, curious, asks what Kyle intends to do, and he replies that he wants to test some magic. This surprises Leonhardt. Leonhardt suggests a place in the outer parts of the property, surrounded by dense trees and invisible from the outside. Kyle says it's perfect and asks him to make sure no one goes near it. Kyle begins to stretch, while Leonhardt thoughtfully remembers that, because of Kyle's illness, he was never able to master either swordsmanship or magic. Reading a few books in a few days shouldn't change that. Suddenly, Kyle launches a magic missile, surprising both himself and Leonhardt. Kyle, however, exaggerates the force, knocking down a tree, and worries if the sound has been heard in the mansion. Leonhardt reassures him, saying that he suppressed the impact of the explosion with his aura, and that probably no one heard the tree fall. Kyle is relieved, commenting that Leonhardt has great reflexes and that it scared him a bit. Leonhardt, still impressed, asks when Kyle formed a magic circle. Kyle replies that he studied hard and finally overcame his illness. Leonhardt remembers Kyle's words, saying that he didn't intend to die young and that he would do whatever it took to survive. Leonhardt thinks that, at that moment, he sensed something different in Kyle. So that's exactly what happened. Leonhardt congratulates Kyle, and their affinity rises to 10. Kyle comments that it was as expected, as Leonhardt is a man of perseverance. Leonhardt mentions that the magic missile is a first circle spell, usually with the power equivalent to a grown man's punch. However, the spell Kyle cast seemed much more powerful, almost like fourth circle magic. Kyle agrees, saying that he is in fact only a first circle wizard, but managed to unleash the power of a fourth circle spell using first circle magic. He admits that even he didn't expect such a result. Leonhardt wonders if Kyle could be a prodigy. Kyle reflects that, no matter how you look at it, the power he showed was noticeable. He attributes part of his success to the mind's eye, which helped him decode all the first circle magic books in the library. Without this ability, it would be much more difficult to form a magic circle. Kyle recalls that in the game, magic was cast in a much simpler way. Just draw a magic symbol with mana, and the magic would be activated immediately. However, according to the magic books of this world, the process is more complicated, involving the drawing of complex magic circles, equations, and calculations. He wonders if this difference in the method of casting magic might have increased the spell's power. Worried, Kyle realizes that it's not yet time to reveal his full strength. He asks Leonhardt if he intends to keep it a secret, to which Leonhardt asks if even from the head of the family. Kyle replies that yes, it should be a secret between them. However, Leonhardt's affinity drops to 5, which makes Kyle indignant that he has lost his affection just because of this. Kyle explains that there is a reason why he wants to hide his strength, the succession ceremony, which will take place in 2 months. He asks if Leonhardt is aware of this. Leonhardt explains that the Seltarian family's succession ceremony doesn't choose the successor by age, but through a competition based on personality, swordsmanship, wisdom, knowledge, public support, and of course, the opinions of loyal followers. All these factors are judged to select the most promising heir, the one who will lead the family to the greatest prosperity. 2 people are currently competing fiercely for the position of heir: the eldest son, Abel Seltarian, and the second son, Adolphe Seltarian. Kyle begins by introducing these 2 characters, starting with Abel, the eldest son of the Seltarian's legitimate wife and the most likely candidate to be heir. Abel has a gentle nature, excellent sword skills, and has been groomed as an heir since childhood, growing up with high expectations as an elite role model. He is supported mainly by the family's long-standing servants. Next, Kyle talks about Adolphe, also the son of the legitimate wife, but always overshadowed by his older brother. During his youth, Adolphe developed a composed personality and his sword skills improved rapidly, making him stand out in the family. His supporters are mainly young, passionate knights, and Kyle mentions that Adolphe has the look of a gang leader. At a meeting, Adolphe asks Abel if he was ignoring his younger brother. Abel, distracted, replies that he was so lost in thought that he didn't even notice Adolphe there, which Adolphe takes as a joke. He comments that it's hard to believe that Abel, who manifested an aura at the age of 5, didn't sense someone's presence. Abel plays it down, saying that it was many years ago and not something worth mentioning. Abel says he was ashamed and that Adolphe shouldn't do it again, or people would laugh at him. He comments that it's not something worth mentioning. Some of the men then comment that Adolphe manifested his aura for the first time when he was 15. One of them says that one of his sons was also like that, and he was worried that his son was slow and untalented. Abel replies that some people just start slowly, but now that Adolphe has taken that first difficult step, he will grow very quickly. Adolphe's friends get angry and ask Abel if he wants to die, but Adolphe tells them to stop, pointing out that they are in the main house, where his father lives, and that they shouldn't act recklessly. They apologize to Adolphe. Abel comments that Adolphe has trained his subordinates well, and that he really is worthy of being a candidate for heir to the Seltarian. Adolphe, in response, tells Abel to laugh as much as he likes because he won't be laughing for much longer. Adolphe turns and walks away while Abel watches his brother. The scene switches to the protagonist, Kyle, who mentions that there are only 2 months until the heir succession ceremony. He explains that the Marquisate of Seltarian does not follow the principle of primogeniture, where the eldest inherits by right. Strength is the only determining factor, and any direct descendant is eligible to compete for the position of heir, regardless of whether they are born of a legitimate or illegitimate lineage. Kyle comments that, due to his illness, he has always been excluded from the competition, as has his third brother, Duck, who is 15 and still doesn't have great skills in magic or swords. Leonhardt asks if Kyle already knows who the candidates for succession are, and Kyle confirms that the competition will be between his older brothers, Abel and Adolphe. Neither of them would like a new variable to emerge at this stage of the competition, especially so close to the succession ceremony. Kyle reflects that if they discover that he, a fool who has always been ignored, has suddenly become very strong, 2 reactions are possible. Either they will try to recruit him as an ally or they will try to eliminate him, seeing him as a threat. Leonhardt comments that this is very extreme thinking, but acknowledges that history is full of bloodshed over succession. Kyle agrees, saying that this is exactly what he was trying to explain. He reflects that, in the game's scenario, Abel is fundamentally a good person, so he should be fine. However, Adolphe would surely try to decapitate him, since Adolphe has been planning to eliminate his entire family from the start. For Kyle, his only option is to overcome his illness and secure a promising future. Kyle then mentions that he still has a lot to learn, and that the youngest mage in the IST circle would be an ideal ally. Leonhardt understands what Kyle is trying to do and agrees that many mages hide their abilities for safety. It's not uncommon for mages to lower their circle level to avoid exposure. Leonhardt says that, after the succession ceremony, he will report the situation to the head of the family, and Kyle agrees, thinking that this was the best that could be done, considering the current low affinity. Kyle realizes that Leonhardt is loyal to the head of the family, his father, and knows that he can't expect Leonhardt to be on his side immediately. However, he is determined to win Leonhardt as an ally one day. Leonhardt, feeling a chill, comments that Kyle seems to be taking his journey to becoming a wizard seriously. He mentions that for the Marquisate of Seltarian, known for being a family of swordsmen, having a mage could be a great advantage. Leonhardt adds that the head of the family will be very pleased to hear this, and Leonhardt's affinity rises to 30. Kyle, surprised by the sudden increase in affinity, ponders what could have caused it. Leonhardt then comments that Urgel is very good in the kitchen, and she humbly thanks him, saying that it's only a modest skill. Kyle thinks that perhaps eating together will increase their affinity, and, desperate, suggests that Leonhardt and Urgel eat together with him every day in his room. Leonhardt suggests that they could eat in the Knight's Lodge, but Urgel happily accepts Kyle's idea. The scene changes to night. Kyle continues to study and reflects that if he uses the game magic method, the activation is quick and the power is immense, but he won't be able to fully control that power. He wonders why game magic is so powerful and difficult to deal with in the real world. Kyle decides that he will temporarily seal off the use of this method, as he will have the chance to demonstrate his magic in the future. For the time being, he will use basic magic, as the method of activating magic in this world is much slower. Kyle begins to think that if he combines the advantages of the games and the real world's methods of activating magic, he might get a really surprising result. Excited by the idea, he decides to give it a try. Suddenly, a red alert system appears in front of him, informing him of the high risk of a magical explosion and asking if he wishes to continue. Kyle, startled, realizes that the system was only warning him of the danger and decides to take the risk. He accepts the system's message. The system warns him again about the risks of mixing two methods of activating magic, emphasizing the danger of a magical explosion. Kyle, determined, confirms that he wants to proceed. The system begins to analyze his body and the method of activation, while his understanding of magic missiles is assessed as very high. Soon, the system announces that the path analysis has been completed, and Kyle celebrates the creation of a new magic with a mixed magic missile activation method. He considers it a great achievement. Kyle decides to add a little more mana, but on second thought decides to reduce production to avoid problems. The system warns him again about the risk of a magical explosion due to the mixture of methods. Despite having reduced his mana, something goes wrong. Suddenly, Urgel hears an explosion coming from Kyle's room and runs to see if he's alright. Kyle reassures Urgel that everything is fine, but his room is completely destroyed, with a huge hole in the wall. He explains that he was practicing some magic and admits that he should have done the experiments outside. He also comments that he now understands better what the warning messages mean and that next time he will create better working conditions, including suitable barriers for future experiments. Soon after, Leonhardt enters the room, asking about the noise. He notices the giant hole in the wall and, with a straight face, Kyle asks if Leonhardt could help him clean up the mess. The scene shifts to Urgel, who is preparing the food and realizes that something is missing from the taste. She tries to figure out how to improve the taste. Just then, one of the maids, Daisy, appears and asks if Urgel is preparing the meal for Lord Kyle. Daisy praises Urgel's dedication and comments on how hard she works every day. Urgel replies that it's nothing, that it's just her job, but Daisy notices that Urgel is very cautious. Daisy suggests adding a little nutmeg to the food, explaining that this ingredient enhances the flavor and makes the meal richer. Urgel follows the tip and is surprised at how delicious it turns out. She then asks Daisy if she works in the kitchen and if she could teach her more about cooking. Daisy, smiling, happily accepts and says she'd be happy to help in any way she can. She starts by saying that she's going to help carry the food. As they load up the food, Daisy asks how Lord Kyle is lately, mentioning that she's heard he's been behaving much better. Daisy admits that she was worried when she heard that Urgel would become Kyle's personal maid, afraid that he might cause trouble or mistreat her. Urgel assures her that everything is fine and that Kyle treats her very well. Daisy, relieved, comments that she has also heard that Kyle has become much more responsible recently, waking up early to exercise and studying hard. She points out that this change is really impressive. Urgel comments that Lord Kyle is very hardworking and studies too much. The scene changes and she tells Kyle everything that happened. Kyle asks if Daisy really did ask him questions. Urgel confirms it and says that Daisy asked him what he was studying and who he was in a relationship with. Kyle, curious, asks what Urgel said. She says that she simply said that she wasn't sure and that she didn't think she should reveal anything about Lord Kyle. Kyle smiles and praises Urgel, saying that it was the right answer and that she did very well. He advises her to always evaluate her answers in the future. Kyle admits that it will be difficult to hide the fact that he overcame his illness and started studying magic. Urgel agrees and says he'll keep that in mind. The protagonist reflects that he thought Adolphe, his impatient brother, would be the first to react and comments that Adolf's claws are already starting to show. He ponders that, as the older brother, Adolf should act first. The scene switches to Leonhardt talking to Rampton, the father of the family. Rampton stands up, indignant, when he hears Leonhardt say that Kyle has overcome his illness. Leonhardt confirms it, explaining that Kyle is studying magic on his own and has already reached the first magic circle. He mentions that although Kyle's power is equivalent to that of a first circle spell, he will explain more about this later. Rampton, surprised and angry, remembers when he last heard about Kyle, who was in a terrible state. He reflects on the last conversation he had with Kyle, when the boy, still furious, asked if he had asked to be born with that body. Kyle begged to be left to die, and Rampton, in response, called him a useless brat, saying that he never considered him a son, and that he should be locked in his room. Now Rampton reflects on his harsh words and asks how old Kyle is. Leonhardt replies that Kyle's 13th birthday has just passed. Rampton ponders that, in order to overcome that illness, Kyle would need to have an exceptional talent in magic or swords, talents that usually manifest themselves around the age of 5 or 6. He asks Leonhardt if he knows of anyone who has overcome this disease by the age of 13. Leonhardt replies that, as far as he knows, no one has, but he has witnessed with his own eyes Kyle overcoming the disease and using first circle magic. Rampton thoughtfully wonders if it could be a miracle. He then asks Leonhardt what he thinks, if he should meet Kyle. Leonhardt, surprised, asks if Rampton really doesn't want to see his own son. Rampton hesitates, saying he doesn't know because he thinks Kyle still harbors resentment. Leonhardt reassures him that, in fact, Kyle very much wants to see him and that, if there's anything Rampton wants to say, Leonhardt can deliver the message. Rampton, however, decides that he needs to talk to Kyle in person. The scene cuts to Leonhardt talking to Kyle, explaining that, as he knows, Kyle is still under house arrest, and without Rampton's permission, he can't leave the annex. Kyle, desperate, begs Leonhardt to convey the message that he really wants to see his father. Leonhardt realizes that, instead of resentment, Kyle really wants to meet and reconcile with Rampton. It is revealed that Rampton Saltarian is the head of the prestigious Saltarian family of swordsmen, protectors of humanity against monsters for generations. He is one of the continent's 5 masters of the sword and Kyle Saltarian's father. Kyle, while looking at a portrait of his father, realizes that his hands are shaking uncontrollably. His body still remembers the fear and resentment he felt towards Rampton. Kyle remembers the harsh words of his father, who said that he couldn't even lift a sword, even though he was the son of the renowned Saltarian family of swordsmen. Kyle, in his memoirs, replies that it was too difficult for him, but his adamant father insisted that, as a descendant of the Saltarian, he should be able to handle a sword. Kyle remembers a painful memory from when he was younger. He had asked his father if he was really a useless child, since he couldn't even use a sword and was destined to die soon because of his illness. In tears, he begged his father not to abandon him. The protagonist, now with all these memories of the old Kyle, feels the emotional impact. These memories are not just of the old Kyle, but are now his too, since the souls of Lee Hyun-woo and Kyle Saltarian have merged. The pressure and anguish that Kyle felt is being transmitted completely to him. However, Kyle reflects that he is no longer the coward he used to be. Now he's both Kyle and Lee, and as an adult, he's going to prove his worth to Rampton Saltarian. He enters his father's living room. Rampton asks him what he has to say, noticing that Kyle called him Marquis instead of father. He wonders what Kyle's intentions are now. Rampton recalls that he instructed Kyle not to leave the room without permission, although he did allow him to use the library recently. He warns that if Kyle causes any more trouble, he won't just be locked up this time. Kyle feels his body shaking again, something he can't help since the old Kyle caused so much trouble. He also reflects that Rampton, being one of the continent's 5 masters of the sword, would probably be strict in this way. The system tells him that Kyle's opponent, Rampton Saltarian, is a high-ranked 48-year-old, but there are no more details available about him. Kyle thinks about evaluating favorability with the system, but realizes that it's difficult to do so now. Without many options, he decides that the only way out is to negotiate with his father. Kyle says he understands Rampton's concerns, which is why he formally requested a hearing through Leonhardt. Rampton comments that the rumors that Kyle had grown up were true. Kyle admits that he has caused a lot of trouble in the past and acknowledges his mistakes. He says he deeply regrets his immature and aggressive behavior, but assures that things will change now. Surprised, Rampton stands up indignantly, reflecting that this child, who used to blame others and get angry on a daily basis, is now apologizing. Kyle then says that he has one more thing to discuss. He would like to make a deal with the Marquis. Rampton asks what kind of deal that would be. Kyle explains that Rampton must have heard from Leonhardt that he has overcome his illness. Rampton confirms it, but says it's still hard to believe in something so miraculous. Kyle reaffirms that it's true and casts a spell, demonstrating that he is now a first circle wizard. Even after listening to Leonhardt, Rampton was still skeptical, but when he saw the magic, he began to believe. Rampton comments that he can feel the flow of mana inside Kyle, and Kyle confirms that it will continue to grow. He mentions that mages who overcome that illness are known for having exceptional potential, and that perhaps that's why it only took him a few days to reach the first circle through intense study. Kyle points out that the value of a great mage is equivalent to an entire order of knights. He then proposes that, although the Seltarian family is known for its swordsmen, having an exceptional mage among the direct descendants would be an advantage. He suggests that, with the family's support, he can develop as a wizard and bring great contributions to House Seltarian. Kyle explains to his father that if the Seltarian family had both swordsmen and mages, they would be superior to all the other families in the country. He asks his father what he thinks of the proposal, pointing out that this deal would benefit both the family and himself. Kyle then asks Rampton to please invest in him, as he is a talent truly capable of achieving great things. Kyle reflects that, in life, give and take is essential. The quickest way to win someone's favor is to show them what you can offer in return. Rampton Seltarian values family benefit and honor above all else, and appealing to family ties alone wouldn't work. Sometimes ruthless decisions are necessary for the good of the family. In the past, Kyle tried to attract his father's attention by causing trouble, thinking that he was indifferent, but he realized that this would only lead to more trouble. Now, Kyle understands that if their interests align, it will be possible to build a relationship, even if the relationship was bad in the past. Rampton observes that Kyle is no longer the same child as before. There is something different about him. Rampton notices that Kyle now understands what his opponent needs and is trying to negotiate to get what he wants, something essential for aristocratic children. He reflects on how the child, who used to throw tantrums and whom he considered a failure, has grown up remarkably. Rampton concludes that it is all right to recognize him as a valuable asset to the Seltarian family. Rampton stands up and tells Kyle that he will provide all the funds and magic stones needed for his studies. In return, he wants Kyle to show his worth. Kyle, confident, promises to live up to his father's expectations. A few days later, Leonhardt and Urgel are with Kyle, who presents the new environment that is now his magic workshop. He has reinforced the place with magical barrier artifacts and equipped it with tools for creating potions and artifacts. Kyle comments that there will now be no more holes in the walls. Leonhardt is impressed and comments that it must have cost a lot of money, asking where it came from. Kyle reveals that all the money came from his father. He comments that, by showing a bit of charm, his father gladly offered the resources. Leonhardt wonders if this crude charm really worked with the boss. Kyle then calls Urgel, and she asks if he needs anything. Kyle explains that it's nothing like that, but that it's difficult to use spirit magic freely in that room, so he has prepared a separate space for her, equipped with soundproofing and dustproofing, so that she can practice without worry. He asks her if she likes the new space, and she is thrilled and thanks him, saying that she will definitely use it. Kyle reinforces that he wants Urgel to become more than a maid, that she should be an irreplaceable spiritual magician, a trusted assistant. Thrilled, Urgel promises to work hard and one day become someone who is truly useful to Kyle. Her favorability rises to 70. Suddenly, a glow appears in the room, and Kyle wonders why a spirit magic circle is reacting. He wonders if Urgel has just used spirit magic, but she denies it, saying she hasn't done anything. In the middle of the light, a creature appears, and Kyle wonders if this is a summoning of spirits. The creature immediately goes to Urgel and embraces her. Kyle realizes that, as expected of someone with the talent of spirit companion, Urgel has already managed to summon a spirit. Kyle praises Urgel, saying that she is incredible for being able to summon spirits without even realizing it. He explains that spirit magic is different from casting spells or reciting incantations. It involves feeling the energy of nature spirits in the soul, and when her emotions intensified, the spirit stones reacted, summoning a spirit. Kyle notices that all the spirit stones that were carried are now gone, used in the summoning. Urgel asks if it was true that she had used all the spirit stones, and Kyle replies that it's fine, as the stones were made to be used. However, he admits that he didn't expect her to summon a spirit so quickly and wonders what kind of spirit it was. The system then informs him that the spirit is a high-ranking opponent, but that the system can't identify it correctly. Kyle notes that although the spirit looks small, it is high-ranking, which is why the system wasn't working correctly. Kyle asks Urgel if she knows what kind of spirit it was. She then talks to the spirit in an unknown dialect and then tells Kyle that the spirit's name is Xyrus, an ancient spirit of the light, which surprises him greatly. He is even more surprised to realize that this small, chubby spirit is actually an ancient spirit of the light. The spirit, offended, reacts angrily and bites Kyle's head off. It is explained that ancient spirits are extremely rare, and even high-level spirit mages would only be able to summon one after pouring out all their spirit stones and praying for 3 days and 3 nights. However, Urgel summons Xyrus unconsciously and first time, which impresses Kyle. The spirit, still angry, clings to Urgel. Kyle comments that it seems the spirit wants to be her friend and suggests that she make a contract with him, since the spirit was summoned unconsciously, which indicates a high compatibility between them. Urgel asks the spirit if it would like to make a contract with her. At that moment, the spirit begins to glow brightly, and Urgel solemnly declares, "I, Urgel Helene, will make the most sincere contract with Xyrus, the ancient spirit of light." The system then registers that Urgel Helene has officially become the summoner of Xyrus. The system asks her to choose a name for the spirit. Kyle jokingly suggests the name Padak. Everyone is silent, looking at him. The system asks again for a name to be chosen, and Urgel, with a smile, decides to accept Kyle's suggestion, calling the spirit Padak. The system confirms the name, and registration is complete. Urgel picks up the little spirit and says that from now on he will be called Padak, and that she is looking forward to working with him. She thanks the spirit for becoming her friend, while Kyle reflects that his search for talent was going very well. Time passes, and a few days later, Adolphe, Kyle's older brother, shows up to talk to him. Adolphe comments that, as his older brother, he hasn't paid much attention to Kyle lately. Kyle replies that everything is fine and that, if that were the case, perhaps he should have gone to Adolphe first. Urgel, present, asks if they need anything else, and Kyle kindly says that she's worked too hard and can rest. Adolphe then asks if that wasn't the same girl Kyle bought at the slave market. He comments that she is quiet and pretty, and jokingly says that he was in need of a new maid, suggesting that Kyle could send her to him. Kyle, annoyed, thinks to himself that Adolphe was a despicable brat. He realizes that Adolphe was only there to hear the news about his illness being cured, and that was the first thing he said. Kyle, trying to resolve the situation without arousing suspicion, says he won't give Urgel to him and asks if it couldn't be someone else. Pretending, Kyle tries to show an interest in Urgel to throw Adolphe off. Noticing Kyle's behavior, Adolphe laughs and says that he was only joking and that he wasn't such a scoundrel. He says that he would never take a girl that his little brother likes. Kyle, still pretending, asks Adolphe not to provoke him like that, saying that he was really scared. Adolphe then decides to give up for now, as he can't afford to antagonize Kyle at the moment. However, he reflects that hearing rumors that the child prodigy has suddenly taken an interest in young women makes him seem like a hopeless case, but in a way it makes him seem easier to deal with, which is a relief for him. Adolphe thinks it will be easier to corrupt Kyle to the dark side. If he had known his little brother was so much fun, he would have tried to be his friend a long time ago. Adolphe comments that Kyle's body seems to have recovered a lot. Kyle confirms this, saying that although the disease isn't completely cured, his condition is gradually improving. Adolphe asks about the partial cure, and Kyle explains that, as it is a long-term illness, it is difficult to cure it completely at once, but progress is being made. Kyle then shows Adolphe a magic spell he has created, pointing out that it is about 1.5 times more powerful than ordinary magic, and asks him what he thinks. Adolphe compliments him, saying that it's really impressive that Kyle can create magic. However, Adolphe reflects that although Kyle's illness is not completely cured, he is rapidly growing into the level of a first circle student. This wouldn't affect the heir succession, but Kyle's progress seems remarkable. Adolphe remembers Danza's report about the drastic change in Kyle's attitude and his growing magical abilities. He ponders whether the report was exaggerated, but decides it's wise to remain cautious. Even so, Adolphe concludes that Kyle is still just a 13-year-old boy, and that there's no point in worrying too much. It would be more beneficial to persuade him and use him, and when Kyle became useless, he would simply discard him. Adolphe then asks Kyle directly if he would like to join his side. Kyle, sensing the opportunity, asks what exactly Adolf means by that, but in his mind, he celebrates having gotten Adolf to show his intentions. Adolf goes on to say that, if Kyle wants, he can get his father's permission. Kyle thanks him for his trust, while Adolf leaves. Leonhardt wishes Adolf a safe journey. As he leaves, Adolf thinks about Leonhardt, considering him a tough nut to crack. He reflects that, even though he was persuaded, Leonhardt never changed sides, but it was better to have him on Kyle's side than on Abel's. He would rather Leonhardt rot in the hands of a boy he considers a failure. He would rather Leonhardt rot in the hands of a boy he considers a failure. Adolf teases Leonhardt, saying that it's unfortunate that the darling of the knights is now guarding a useless boy. After Adolf leaves, Kyle's father arrives and Leonhardt enters Kyle's room. Kyle tells Leonhardt that Adolf has invited him to join the subjugation team and that he will probably work alongside Viscount Jerome, one of Adolf's closest aides from the 5th Legion. This will be a test mission to prove his loyalty to his brother and gain recognition in the family. Leonhardt expresses concern, saying that if he joins the subjugation mission, he will too. However, Kyle asks Leonhardt not to accompany him, explaining that Leonhardt's presence would make Adolf wary. Kyle needs to win Adolf's trust, so he can't take his father's men with him. Leonhardt insists that the situation could be dangerous and even a trap, but Kyle admits that it is possible. However, he believes that Adolf would not trust so quickly and that he is probably testing his usefulness in real combat. Kyle sees this as an opportunity to prove his worth, but assures Leonhardt that he won't show all his skills during the mission and that he can protect himself. Changing the subject, Kyle asks Leonhardt if he has heard of a foundation called Yoru, located to the south of Tran territory, where there is a forest with a colony of monsters. He mentions that the Marquisate of Seltarian regularly sends out subjugation teams to clear out the monsters. Just then, Viscount Jerome introduces himself to Kyle, saying that he heard about him from Adolf. Adolf mentioned that he would be working with Kyle on this subjugation team, so I told him that this would be his first real fight and asked him to please take care of him. Gerton replied that I didn't need to worry, as he would protect him. However, the system reported that Gerton's favorability was -40, so he certainly wouldn't protect him. Kyle thought it would be best to avoid Jerome for a while. He said he would be getting ready, and Jerome asked him to let him know if he needed anything. Leonhardt remembered Adolf's words, saying that, as Kyle was a first circle wizard, he didn't know much and was supposed to keep an eye on him, seeing how skilled he was, but without letting him die. Gerton then thought that Lord Adolf had given him a difficult mission during the subjugation, and wondered what someone so inexperienced with a deadly disease could do. He thought that, with luck, Kyle wouldn't get in the way of the battle, but he knew it would be very difficult. Kyle then used a blast of lightning, eliminating a group of goblins, and everyone started celebrating, saying that he was excellent. Kyle's favorability went up a little. Then he used the power of fire, burning several goblins at once, and again his favorability rose. Everyone started saying that Kyle was incredible, and that it was the easiest subjugation in recent times. Kyle's favorability was already at 50. He thought he had never found such an easy target, and his favorability had increased by 90% since the last time. Jaren commented that Adolf would be very happy to hear about Lord Kyle's performance. Kyle thought that now was the time to go ahead with his second plan. The scene then changed to the camp at night, where everyone was celebrating Kyle's victory. He modestly said that he hadn't done anything to deserve so much praise, but the others replied that his magical abilities were impressive, and that they had the wrong idea about him because they thought that, being so young and always living in the mansion, he would have many difficulties in combat. However, Kyle not only joined the battle bravely, he also didn't complain about the bad food in the camp, showing himself to be more mature than he looked. Kyle mentioned that his brother Adolf had probably always lived like that, since he was a monster subjugator, and that he, Kyle, couldn't just be spoiled. Everyone was delighted with this response, and Jaren said that he hadn't known that he admired Lord Adolf so much. They assured Adolf that they would tell him how much their brother Kyle admired him, and how he had excelled greatly in battle. Kyle's favorability rose to 60, and all the others also promised to help him. It was late, and Kyle said he would take a look around before going to bed. One of the men replied that everything was fine, but asked him not to go too far. Kyle thought that they didn't even suspect anything, simply because he was a child. The riders, encouraged by the day's victory, collapsed in exhaustion. Kyle thought he was using them to gain experience in the game, and held in his hand a bottle of ogre perfume, which summons ogres within a radius of 10 meters. This perfume was created by Kale St. Aaron. Then we have a flashback of Leonhardt talking to Kyle. Leonhardt asked what ogre perfume was, as he had never heard of it before. Kyle replied that he believed he was the first to create such a perfume, and that the world still didn't know its recipe. Kyle explained that it was literally a perfume that summoned ogres within a radius, and the greater the quantity, the greater the ogre. Leon Hart then commented that the subjugation team's target was goblins, but that ogres were high-level monsters, and it would be difficult for the team to deal with them. Kyle then says that this is exactly what he wants. 12 specialist knights are taking part in that subjugation team. The goblins may be controllable, but the ogres are another story. If they look at the regular soldiers of the 5th Legion, despite being called a knightly order, they're just a disorganized bunch. They are highly loyal to Adolf, but their individual skills are mediocre. They are street criminals who ended up forming a legion. Adolf brainwashed them using dark powers. The intense brainwashing turned them into fanatics, and as a result, Adolf didn't expand his influence easily, but proved his ability to lead even the most desperate individuals. Today, these individuals are very well controlled. If Adolf makes a move during the succession ceremony, tragedy could strike. Kyle then comments that even the R bandits are in this state. The brainwashed high-level knights will be really problematic, and he plans to weaken the 5th Legion as much as possible before the succession ceremony. He will start with the 12 high-level specialist knights, who will fight bravely to the death against the ogres, while Kyle will survive this deadly battle, returning with the realization of defeating those ogres. This is exactly what our protagonist plans to do. Suddenly, a gigantic ogre starts attacking the camp, and everyone starts running away from the ogre. Soon after, they see blood and realize that an expert knight has died. If even he couldn't deal with the ogre, how could the intermediate knights do anything? Kyle asks everyone to be quiet and asks if they are the honorable knights of Seltarian. If they retreat now, the ogres will invade the territory, so they would have to stop them right there, whatever the cost. Everyone then decides to follow Lord Kyle. Viscount Jerome appears, saying that he was safe, thank God, and that they should leave the ogre with him, a knight of high rank. He mentions that Lord Adolf asked him to make sure nothing happened to Kyle. While he was holding the ogre, Kyle should find a safe place. However, Kyle refuses, saying that he would not flee the battlefield and would fight alongside them until the end. He says that he couldn't face his brother Adolf if he abandoned his men and ran off on his own. He wonders if that wasn't the right thing to do. Jerome is very impressed by Kyle's words. Kyle then uses a spell on Jerome and says that, as he is still a first circle mage, he will be in charge of providing support and controlling things from behind, while Viscount Jerome could lead from the front. Jerome agrees, saying that this is enough for him. The Viscount thinks that the courageous way in which Kyle faced the battle without backing down in fact shows that Lord Kyle is an indispensable piece of equipment for his brother Adolf. He decides that he must ensure that Adolf trusts Kyle without hesitation. So they advance against the ogre. The other soldiers, seeing Viscount Jerome and Kyle fighting, couldn't show their more pathetic side, so they decide to follow the Viscount in an attempt to help. Kyle asks everyone to do their utmost. He then thinks that it was he who summoned the ogres, and the ogre perfume was performing exceptionally well, summoning variants 2 or 3 times as powerful. Kyle instructs the 5th Legion to keep fighting, because that is where they will meet their end. The battle became even more intense, and other high-ranking knights were killed. There were hardly any soldiers left. They began to wonder if they would really make it out alive, since that creature was so much stronger than them. Kyle thinks that this creature must be much, much stronger, and if it wasn't, what would be its purpose? He decides that he will exterminate every last one of those dark-stained knights right there, and that would be the giant ogre's mission. Jerome then commented that there were 12 knights of high rank. Now, including Kyle, there were only 3 knights left, and he wondered if they could really beat that ogre. Kyle thought it was time to use the last resource he had. He then remembered the words of Adolf, who said that Jerome had just gained the power of darkness and become stronger. Adolf explained that Jerome should feel the power flowing through him, but warned him about something important. If he released all the dark power in its entirety, he could revert to his original form, becoming a raging monster without any humanity. That's why he should never release all that power. However, if he did, he could defeat the 2-headed ogre, although he would lose control and would no longer be able to contain his rage. Even so, Jerome thought that this would be better than dying in that place. However, just as Jerome was about to use the power of darkness, Kyle cast a spell against the ogre, providing Jerome with magical protection, and said that he could now move forward more safely. Jerome thought that, with Kyle as a sorcerer, it was still too early to use that last resort. Kyle then used a mental cleansing spell on everyone who was still fighting. They felt a huge wave of energy coursing through their bodies and said that their minds were clear. They declared themselves to be the 5th Legion, under the command of Lord Adolf, ready to show their true strength. Everyone set out to attack the ogre at once. Kyle started counting how many knights were left, but suddenly the ogre killed all the high-level knights. Kyle smiled, saying that his priority was to eliminate the 12 knights strengthened by Adolphe, and now, with 11 of them dead, only Viscount Jerome remained. Jerome, terrified, said that everyone's sacrifice would not be in vain and asked Kyle to cast one more spell on him, saying that he would finish off the mutant ogre once and for all. Kyle, smiling, said that the time had finally come and that he would give Jerome the amount of magic he needed, commenting that he had managed to fool them. Suddenly, invisible hands began to hold Jerome, and he was confused, not understanding what was happening. He tried to move, but his body wouldn't respond. Kyle ordered him to keep his eyes forward, because the ogre was coming towards him. The ogre finally struck Jerome with a fatal blow, killing him instantly. All the other knights were horrified by what they were witnessing. With Viscount Jerome dead, they wondered what they could do against that ogre, believing that they would probably die too. Suddenly, however, fire magic was thrown in the ogre's direction, charring its body. Kyle declared that the battle was finally over. He took the ogre's inner core, which was of high quality, and said that it was time to end the whole charade. Kyle stated that the mutant ogre was dead and that, thanks to the opportunity given by Viscount Jerome, he had managed to defeat it. Victory was attributed to the 12 brave knights of high rank and to everyone who fought without thinking of their own lives. The victory was everyone's, and they finally managed to defeat that creature. Everyone started celebrating and praising Kyle, getting ready to go home. They eliminated the two-headed mutant ogre and destroyed the goblins, which was the original objective of the mission. However, they also suffered significant losses. Adolphe arrived in despair, asking if it was true that Viscount Jerome was dead. Kyle confirmed it, saying that Jerome had fallen in a fierce battle against the mutant ogre and that, if he hadn't fought so bravely, he might have been killed himself. Adolphe, anguished, wondered if Jerome had even had time to use the power of darkness before he lost. The loss of Viscount Jerome was a severe blow, not to mention that all the high-ranking knights had also been eliminated, leaving them with no options at that point. In any case, they would have to take the ogre's body back to camp. Adolphe then said he was relieved that Kyle had returned safely and asked if defeating the mutant ogre was his achievement. Adolphe promised that he would inform his father so that Kyle could be properly honored. Kyle thanked his brother, but kept a very serious look on his face. He thought that, for the time being, it looked like he had fooled Adolphe. Later in the evening, Kyle reflected that this situation was what could be called killing two birds with one stone, since he managed to defeat the 5th Legion and also won Adolphe's recognition, as well as acquiring the mutant ogre's core. He commented that this could be counted as killing 3 birds with 1 stone. Leonhardt said it was very dangerous, but was relieved that Kyle had returned safely, considering that a mutant ogre had appeared on the scene. Kyle replied that it was no big deal since he could have defeated him on his own, but he was playing weak. He added that he wanted to show off his skills, but he still looked harmless. Leonhardt then asked if Kyle was planning to join Lord Adolphe now and what would happen to Lord Abel. Kyle only asked to observe a little longer, saying that they would be looking for him soon. A few days later, in the Saltarian conference room, the family patriarch said that they would analyze the outcome of the expedition, decide on the distribution of the spoils and discuss Kyle's contributions, which had been crucial in defeating the mutant ogre. He invited anyone who had objections to speak up. Suddenly, the Baron of Hamilton raised his hand and questioned whether Kyle's participation in the expedition was being exaggerated. The head of the family asked what he meant by that. The Baron replied that, of course, the chief loved his youngest son and intended to praise him, but Kyle was still a first-circle wizard, just an apprentice who had recently started learning magic. Considering the commotions and problems Kyle had caused in the past, it would be excessive to praise his achievements just because he took part in an expedition and came back alive. He said it was hard to believe that Kyle had matured overnight and asked everyone if they weren't aware of the problems Kyle had caused. Kyle thought that the Baron didn't hesitate to expose his mistakes in front of everyone, and that this was a result of his bad reputation and reckless attitudes in the past. Kyle then asked the Baron if he had any experience of personally fighting a mutant ogre and said that it would be better to judge after going through it. He explained that facing a mutant ogre wasn't as easy as it looked, and questioned whether the Baron had the necessary experience to deal with such a monster. Abel then intervened, saying that even high-level knights would have difficulty defeating a normal ogre, and fighting a mutant ogre, which is twice as strong, returning safely was practically a miracle. Kyle was surprised that Abel was defending him. Abel went on to explain that all the knights had risked their lives to protect Kyle, and with the exception of him, all 12 high-level knights had died. However, the decisive blow that defeated the mutant ogre was Kyle's magic, and this was confirmed by the testimonies of the surviving knights. Although Kyle had been considered useless during his childhood, he had now demonstrated admirable and exceptional performance, and was dedicating himself to the study of magic. Abel then said that Baron Hamilton should put his prejudices aside and recognize Kyle's achievements. Adolf thought to himself that Abel should shut up because he was ruining everything. Adolf asked the Baron if he really had the right to criticize Kyle, the direct heir of the Marquez family, on the basis of past issues that were no longer relevant, and wondered if he was trying to overstep his bounds. The Baron, surprised, replied that he would never try to do that. Kyle, for his part, wondered what was going on, since everyone seemed so eager to praise him. Adolf then told his father that he agreed with Kyle's achievements and that he should be duly recognized. He mentioned that the 5th Legion, which Kyle led, had witnessed his bravery in battle. The father, after listening to both Abel and Adolf, decided that there were no more objections to recognizing Kyle's achievements. Thus, from that moment on, Kyle Centron's status would be officially elevated. He would have free access to the main residence and would be able to leave freely. However, the mutant ogre's spoils would be distributed according to everyone's contributions, and Kyle would not receive any spoils, thus ending the meeting. Kyle was surprised because, although his achievements were being recognized, he would receive nothing from the spoils. He thought to himself that even though his contribution was being recognized, why wasn't he getting anything? He expected at least a share of the spoils. Kyle called his father and asked him to wait a minute, saying that he didn't understand, since he had faced so many challenges. Wasn't he missing something? His father, who was no fool, replied that Kyle had already saved the ogre's core, so he didn't really need anything else. Kyle, in shock, realized that there was really nothing more he needed. Just being free of his condition was enough. His father asked him to do good from now on because he was trusting him. Kyle replied that he could trust him. At that moment, Adolf called Kyle and asked him if he had seen what he had done, reminding him that he had kept his promise to inform his father of his achievements. Adolf asked Kyle to always remember how much he cared. Kyle, for his part, thought that Adolf was always trying to show off. Abel, watching from afar, thought that Kyle, his younger brother, had changed a bit and that they needed to talk. The scene then changes to Abel and Kyle talking. Abel said that he possessed a rather trivial ability and that Kyle would be the first to know, since not even his father knew about it. Kyle thought Abel was about to reveal a secret and expected his brother to come to him after the meeting was over. Abel praised Kyle, saying that he had done a great job in battle and had handled a real battle very successfully, becoming a respected wizard. The whole family was proud of him. Kyle humbly replied that he still had a long way to go, as he was still a first circle wizard and that he had been very lucky during the expedition. Abel agreed and asked if Kyle had some time before dinner, as he wanted to know more details about the expedition. Kyle agreed and said they could talk at any time. During the conversation, Kyle thought he had suspected an ulterior motive for Abel asking about his conquests, but he hadn't expected him to reveal a secret that even his father didn't know. Kyle understood that Abel had no intention of hurting him, but he still couldn't guess his brother's exact purpose. However, it was clear that Abel wanted to recruit him, and in order to overcome the rebellion that Adolf was creating against the Saltarian Marquez, Abel needed to strengthen his own position while weakening Adolf. Only then could he survive in the dangerous power game that was fantasy defense, with the support of the Centauran family. Now Kyle knew he had to choose his words very carefully. Kyle then asks Abel if he really wanted to talk about a secret that not even his father knew, and if it wouldn't be better if he, Kyle, didn't know either. Abel replied, asking if Kyle wanted to hear about it. Kyle, somewhat nervously, said that it wasn't that he didn't want to, but that he was afraid of knowing too much and wondered what Abel could possibly want from him after revealing such an important secret. Abel smiled, saying that Kyle was being mean, and asked if he really thought he would want something in return. Kyle, relieved, replied that he expected that from his older brother, understanding his intentions, but admitted that he didn't have the confidence to win a trial match against Abel. He suggested that they get straight to the point. Kyle then said that, at the moment, he was on the side of Adolf, the second brother, but that didn't mean that he would support him completely, nor that he planned to ally himself with Abel. The scene changed to Abel training, while Denke watched him cut out training dummies. Adolf approached her and asked if his older brother had gone to Kyle's house, to which Denke replied in the affirmative, saying that Skada's knights were present and so she couldn't hear what was discussed. Adolf commented that he could already imagine what the older man had said, but added that he, Adolf, had had his eye on Kyle from the beginning. He knew that if Abel tried to win Kyle over easily, he would be very wrong. Adolf mentioned that if Kyle was influenced by Abel, he would poison him or do something like that. That's why he put Denke in that situation. Back to the conversation between Kyle and Abel, the latter asks Kyle if he would like to know what that was all about. Kyle replied, saying that it was because Abel was very kind, which left Abel surprised and somewhat embarrassed by those unexpected words. Kyle thought that the fact that Abel was called kind wasn't just based on his actions in the game. He then opened his system, which reported that the target Abel was high level and that it wasn't possible to delve into the essence of the matter. Kyle was surprised to realize that Abel's favorability was at 0. With the exception of Azil, he had never had such high favorability with anyone before. Kyle commented that his brother was a really good person. Abel, somewhat moved, said that he appreciated how Kyle saw him in such a positive light, but that he actually felt a little guilty. As an older brother, he hadn't been able to take care of Kyle, and had only come to him at that moment. Kyle, trying to reassure him, replied that there was no need to apologize. He commented that if he'd had a troubled younger brother like him, he'd probably have buried himself somewhere a long time ago, and that just not doing that was already impressive. Abel laughed, saying that Kyle was very good at jokes, and that if he had known he had such a witty brother, he would have tried to connect with him sooner. Abel regretted it, saying that if he had done that, he might not have lost to Adolf. Abel then became serious and told Kyle that he could offer everything Adolf had promised, and even better conditions. He asked if there was any room for reconsideration, as he didn't want Kyle to refuse his offer just because he was being kind. Kyle replied that he was being kind by accepting his older brother's presence, and at least Abel wouldn't try to kill him for allying himself with Adolf. However, he pointed out that Adolf was different, with a much crueler nature. If Kyle became an obstacle to Adolf, he would use any means or method necessary to eliminate him. Kyle was still recovering from an illness and, as a first circle mage and novice, he didn't have enough strength to protect himself. He knew that if Adolf targeted him, he wouldn't be able to resist. Abel then commented that he was probably the only person in the family who had made such an extreme assessment of Adolf. Kyle agreed, but noted that Abel hadn't refuted his assessment or raised any objections, which indicated that he probably also agreed with his opinion. Abel then said yes, and that brings him back to the first point he mentioned. The trivial skill he possesses is a good intuition. Kyle asked what he meant by that, and Abel explained that, from a very young age, he always had a gut feeling before something bad happened. Following this intuition has helped him avoid danger in many situations. However, as the succession ceremony approaches, his premonitions are becoming stronger and stronger, especially as he senses something very dangerous coming from Adolf. However, he has no concrete proof and is still not completely sure. Kyle wondered if Abel was really assessing the situation accurately and if this intuition was a lower form of premonition that allowed him to weakly detect the powers of darkness. He thought that, in the game, Abel didn't have this ability, but perhaps upon entering the game, he had developed a talent that Kyle St. Aaron hadn't had before. Other NPCs were also changing, such as Harold, who was supposed to disappear as a secondary character, but now demonstrated exceptional elemental magical talent. It was an unexpected theory. Abel then commented that, even so, Adolf was his biological brother and the second direct heir to the Marx family. Although his father thought Adolf was a bit violent, Abel didn't think he would cross the line. He added that he was only there because of his bad feeling, trying to keep Kyle safe and check the situation, with no other convenient motives to persuade people. That's why he kept his power a secret and trusted his intuition as an older brother. Kyle then commented that the day Adolf became the successor to the St. Aaron family, the family would be doomed and no one, including himself, would be safe. Abel asked if Kyle really believed that and what he planned to do about it. Kyle replied that he would pretend to be on Adolf's side, gain his trust and act as a loyal subordinate, waiting for the right moment to strike a decisive blow. Abel asked if Kyle planned to betray him behind his back, to which Kyle replied that if it helped his older brother, he would bring Adolf down even more decisively. Kyle held out his hand to Abel and asked if he could help him. Abel, smiling, replied that, as an older brother, how could he refuse a request from his cute little brother? He assured him that he would support him. Kyle then asked for a favor, and the scene shifts to a few days later. There was a large sum of money on Kyle's desk, and Leon looked at it, asking if it was a platinum coin, as just one was worth several times his salary. It was explained that one platinum coin was equivalent to 10 gold coins. Leon asked where so much money came from, and Kyle explained that he got it all from his older brother. Kyle said that he had originally only intended to borrow a little, but Abel asked him if he needed money, how much he needed, and promptly prepared the amount, saying that he didn't need to pay it back as it was a gift for his younger brother. Kyle explained that this was exactly what Abel had said, and that he had never known his older brother to be so generous. Leon then spotted a glowing orb and asked Kyle what it was. Kyle replied that it was a personal communicator that his older brother had given him so that they could communicate easily. Leon was surprised, saying that a personal communicator cost so much that he could buy a mansion with a garden for the price of one. Kyle replied that he already knew that, but this was a simplified version that could only be used for direct communication with Abel. Leon, surprised, commented that it seemed that communication with Abel had been very good. Kyle confirmed this, saying that his older brother was much kinder than he had expected. Kyle asked Leon to keep the money, as he would need it soon. Leon then asked why Kyle needed so much money. The renovation of the workshop had already been completed, and they had recently bought magic stones and spirit stones, so they didn't need anything else for the time being. Kyle commented that he was going to make money and that this would be his investment fund. The scene shifts to Urgel, who asks for the light to gather at the tip of her staff and illuminate the surroundings. Her spirit appeared, and she commented that she was trying to make her spell shine brighter than the spirit. She asked Flappy, her spirit's nickname, not to sit on Lord Kyle's head. Kyle said it was fine, as it was like having a beacon in front of you, which was very useful. Leon then asked Kyle to wait a moment and questioned why they were in a dungeon at that very moment. Kyle replied that there was a dungeon, so they decided to go in. Leon asked what Kyle meant by that, since they had left the house saying they were going to visit Elfin, the neighboring estate. Why did they stop there? Kyle replied that, as there was a dungeon halfway down the road, he had thought of exploring it. Leon insisted that they should get out of there, as it was a dangerous place and they shouldn't stay there for long. Kyle asked what Leon was talking about, since their exploration of the dungeon had only just begun. However, Leon pointed out that the place was dangerous and asked Kyle to think about the path they had taken, which was littered with the bodies of monsters at the entrance to the cave. The further they went, the fewer monsters appeared, which meant there was a good chance there was a boss in the depths. Low and mid-level monsters avoided approaching for fear of this boss. So far, Leon had managed to deal with the situation, but he didn't know what might happen from now on, so he suggested that they return immediately. Kyle, however, said that this was exactly the plan, since their target was the boss. Leon, startled, asked if Kyle had known this all along, and if the excuse of going to the neighboring town was just a pretext. Kyle confirmed that he did indeed have business in Elfin, but that he knew about the dungeon on the way. He explained that if he had told them from the start that they were going to the dungeon, they wouldn't have left home, and the number of knights guarding them would have multiplied. What's more, his brother's spies would have followed, and his older brother would have insisted on sending his own guards, which would have been chaos. Kyle explained that with so many people watching, it would be impossible to clear the dungeon, and if a fight broke out, he would be in the middle of it. There would also be the problem of Urgel, whose training in spirit magic needed to be kept secret, as only Kyle's father knew. It wasn't time to tell his brothers, and he couldn't let people see Flappy. Besides, the biggest problem was that, if there were too many people, he wouldn't be able to keep all the loot from the dungeon for himself. Leon then commented that, even so, it was unwise for just the three of them to be there. Leon argued that, although she was an expert-level knight, Urgel had recently started learning spirit magic, and, even if she had reached the second circle, she was still reckless. Kyle replied that, although she looked weak at home, that wasn't to be mistaken for a lack of power. He reminded Leon that he had already seen the power of her magic, and that now, having overcome her illness, her abilities were drastically different from normal magic. Kyle affirmed that their team was strong enough to clear the dungeon, since they had a tank, a healer, and a damage dealer, i.e. everything they needed. Kyle then told Leon that his master was strong enough, and that he would only get stronger from now on. He asked Leon to watch carefully and to choose who to pledge his loyalty to, him or his father. Kyle added that a knight with two masters wasn't necessary, and he wanted a knight who was loyal only to him. Leon then lowered his sword, and Kyle thought that Leonhardt was still following Hamilton's orders to guard him. In other words, no matter how loyal Leonhardt remained to him, his true master was still the head of the family. Kyle realized that in order to really win over that rigid and loyal knight, simply demonstrating his skills wouldn't be enough, and forcing him would only be problematic. The fact that Leonhardt is hesitating now is enough for Kyle for now. He thinks that when Leonhardt really gets to know him, he will finally gain an impenetrable squire who will be loyal only to him. They finally reached the place where the dungeon master was, the famous boss room. A gigantic creature, sitting with a gigantic hammer, was waiting. The system informed them that this was the secret sanctuary of the Minotaur. Urgel commented that the creature was very large. The protagonist, Kyle, thought that this dungeon was very popular with beginner hunters, as there were no traps, the path was short, there were few monsters, and most importantly, the rewards were generous compared to the difficulty. Kyle reflected that this was the reason he had only brought 3 people with him. Leonhardt commented that the Minotaur was a monster said to be 3 times stronger than an ogre, but fortunately it was still asleep. The Minotaur didn't use magic, but it had incredible brutal strength. If someone blocked the powerful attack of its hammer without using energy in the sword, they would have all their bones crushed. When the Minotaur attacked in a rage, like a bull, it would start a whirlwind attack, and it was crucial to dodge it at all costs. If you tried to block it, it wouldn't matter how strong or sturdy the shield was, the monster would surely tear through everything in its path. Leonhardt suggested luring him to the edge of the room and dodging as much as possible. Once the whirlwind stopped, the Minotaur would be exhausted for a moment, and it would be time to launch all the attacks. Everyone agreed with the plan. Kyle then asked Urgel to cast buffs on him and Leonhardt before starting the battle. He also said that if Urgel was afraid, not to cast the buffs and to hide behind a rock. Urgel, determined, said that she hadn't studied spirit magic just to hide, and that she wanted to help Lord Kyle by showing him the results of her training. Kyle, amazed by her words, said she was fine, but asked her not to overreact and to always keep a safe distance if the situation became dangerous. He reminded her that, as the team's healer, her most important function was to stay alive, ensuring that they would always have another chance. He emphasized that his and Leonhardt's lives were in her hands, and that she needed to remember to always protect herself. Urgel shyly said she understood. Kyle reflected on how knowledge of the dungeon's location, the importance of a battle healer, and the strategy for defeating the Minotaur came only from practical experience. Leonhardt, for his part, began to wonder how Kyle, who had been confined to the estate for so long, knew all this. He seemed very familiar with dungeon combat strategies, and Leonhardt was sure it was the first time Kyle had faced one. Kyle, in shock, realized that Leonhardt was beginning to discover something. He thought he'd forgotten that he knew too much, and that he should just be a 13-year-old boy. Even for a magic genius, knowing all those strategies seemed a little too suspicious. Kyle, trying to disguise it, said that he had learned some basic tips during the goblin hunt, especially when they fought the ogre. Leonhardt, skeptical, asked if he had really learned the Minotaur's characteristics and attack patterns from a group that could barely handle an ogre. Kyle wondered why Leonhardt was asking so many questions. He wondered if Leonhardt had realized something, and, even worse, if he had noticed that he wasn't really the real Kyle. Kyle thought that if Leonhardt found out the truth, it would be game over, and there was no way that could happen. Trying to justify himself, Kyle said that he had read about the Minotaur in a book. Leonhardt asked if he had really read information about the Minotaur in a book, and Kyle replied that he had, since he spent a lot of time in the library and, during that time, secretly read some military strategy books. Leonhardt looked suspicious, but then commented that he had indeed noticed that Kyle had been frequenting the library and studying a lot. He said he was impressed by the fact that Kyle had not only studied magic, but also combat strategies against monsters. Leonhardt then added that the Marks would be proud to see Kyle fighting and of the incredible progress he had made. Urgel also praised Kyle, saying that he was amazing and very nice. Kyle thought that, although Leonhardt seemed hard to please, he was actually easy to convince, and both his and Urgel's affection grew. Kyle reflected that, since he knew the world of that game so well, it would be better to invent an excuse to explain his vast knowledge. He knew he couldn't just rely on the title of magical genius forever. Urgel then summoned the spirits of light and healing, and the system reported that Kyle had a 30% increase in his defense, as well as an increase in his mana and sword energy. The system also highlighted the healing effect, which restored lost health and offered automatic healing for a set time. Kyle complimented Urgel, saying that the healing effect was much stronger now than when she first started learning. He noticed that she had improved a lot, but now it was time for Leonhardt to take action. Leonhardt took the lead, advancing against the Minotaur, who had woken up and started towards him. Leonhardt commented that, in fact, with Kyle's shield and Urgel's buffs, his body seemed completely different, much stronger and lighter than before. The Minotaur, furious, asked who they were and who dared to disturb his chamber. He threatened that anyone who coveted his treasure would be broken in half, for he would forgive no one. Suddenly, Kyle cast an ice spell in the face of the Minotaur, who was surprised. Kyle, with a sarcastic smile, asked the Minotaur what he thought they were, and it replied that, of course, they were dungeon robbers. He then launched more ice attacks, but this time the Minotaur managed to defend himself with his hammer. At this point, Leonhardt found a loophole and attacked the Minotaur, telling him not to lose focus. Kyle thought that Leonhardt was much more sagacious than he had expected. The battle became more intense, with the Minotaur becoming more and more enraged, unable to understand how humans were managing to hurt him. In a rage, the Minotaur shouted that anyone who dared to look at his treasure would never get out alive. He set out to attack Leonhardt, but Kyle's protective shield blocked his strongest attack. The Minotaur was stunned, wondering how his most powerful blow had been blocked. Leonhardt commented that the Minotaur's strength was absurd, and that if Kyle hadn't timed the shield and stone skin spells at the same time, his arm would have been broken. He thought that Kyle used magic very precisely, as if he knew the Minotaur's next move in advance. He also noticed that Kyle's intuition for assessing the situation and using magic at the right time was innate. Leonhardt realized that, yes, Lord Kyle was in complete control of the battle. Kyle then asked Leonhardt to move and, seizing an opportunity, Kyle managed to immobilize the Minotaur. In despair, the Minotaur realized that it could no longer move its body. At this point, Kyle launched several magic missiles at the monster. After receiving all these attacks, the Minotaur fell to its knees. They began to wonder if they had defeated the monster, but the Minotaur stood up again and, with a defiant smile, said that it was not bad for a human. However, that was the end for them, as the Minotaur activated its whirlwind attack and advanced at high speed. Kyle then warned that this was the whirlwind attack he had mentioned earlier, and asked Leonhardt to take the Minotaur to the corners. Everyone started throwing buffs at Leonhardt to help him. Leonhardt attacked the Minotaur's neck with a dagger, causing the monster to see him as a target and chase him. Kyle started a countdown, reminding himself that the best strategy to avoid the whirlpool was simply to dodge it, as facing it directly would not be possible at that moment. He asked Leonhardt not to worry, since after the big attack, the Minotaur would be exhausted for a short moment, which would be the perfect opportunity to attack. Kyle realized that there were only 5 seconds left, but Leonhardt was already out of breath and about to be hit. Just as the Minotaur was about to hit Leonhardt, he got tired and stopped, returning to normal speed. The monster's stamina and defense also returned to normal. They realized that the Minotaur had stopped moving and, at the same time, Kyle's support spells had also ended. If Kyle had arrived a second too late, Leonhardt wouldn't have been able to dodge that attack. Leonhardt began to wonder if it was pure coincidence or if Kyle had actually calculated the time from the beginning. Kyle, seizing the opportunity, said it was time to cause massive damage. He began to conjure several ice crystals, which suddenly began to emit electricity. Kyle explained that this unlocked the limits of the ability, showing what real magic was. He then launched an attack called Ice Spear. The scene then changed to the Minotaur's hammer lying on the ground, while Urgel used his healing magic to treat the team's injuries. Leonhardt looked at his own arm and, completely healed, thanked Urgel. Kyle was overjoyed because now all the treasure was his. He was delighted with the shiny items, his eyes sparkling with joy. He even kissed one of the chests, so happy was he. Kyle then said that it was time to see what was inside the chest, and there were many other treasures inside. The system then began to analyze one of the items and revealed that it was a rhinoceros sword, an artifact made of solid rhino bones and a special metal. The sword increased strength by 10% and was much more durable than ordinary weapons. Kyle commented that the sword would be perfect for Leonhardt. Inside the chest was also a Lul's necklace, full of natural energy, loved by the spirits. The necklace's buff was the nature's blessing, which allowed it to store natural energy and gather it more quickly. Kyle said that this necklace would be perfect for Urgel, as it was an artifact for a user of spirit magic. After rummaging through the trunk a bit more, Kyle Kyle found what he really wanted, the Staff of Bravery. This staff emanated a bold aura and allowed him to cast spells much faster. Its memorization ability allowed it to store up to 3 spells, which could be used without consuming mana, with a maximum of 2 circle spells. In fantasy defense, following the wizard's path and obtaining the weapon from the Minotaur's dungeon was a mandatory strategy. This staff could be used until it reached higher magic circles, and Kyle knew that with it he wouldn't have to worry about weapons for a long time. Leonhardt, looking at the sword, commented that it was indeed a beautiful weapon with impressive magical effects. It was no surprise that the Minotaur had risked his life to protect such a treasure. However, he began to wonder if he really deserved to receive something like this. He remembered Kyle's words, asking him who he would give his loyalty to, him or his father. Kyle had made it clear that he didn't need a knight who served 2 masters, as he wanted someone who was loyal only to him. Leonhardt reflected that he hadn't even answered Kyle's question. Urgel, with a heavy heart, commented that she felt she was only receiving the treasure because Lord Kyle was so kind. She wanted to help in some way, but if she accepted that treasure, how could she repay him? Kyle then asked what she was talking about, since her help in the battle against the Minotaur had been fundamental. If she hadn't been there, they certainly wouldn't have been able to win. Leonhardt agreed, saying that Urgel was right and that the treasure was also very valuable to him. Kyle explained that he was giving them the equipment, but not as a reward. He wanted them to become stronger, and they really needed it since time was limited. These items would greatly increase their strength, and Kyle emphasized that when winning a high-grade dungeon reward, the basic rule was to inform the family and follow the procedures for distribution. However, he didn't intend to announce this loot, as he didn't want the other family members to know about their power. Kyle said that Leonhardt and Urgel were the only ones he could trust at the moment, and that they should take the artifacts to strengthen themselves and become his strength. He reinforced that they urgently needed to become stronger, as that was the only way to survive, especially with the impending darkness that threatened House Seltarian. He asked again if they would accept the gifts, and they both did. Kyle then said that it was time for them to go back to Elfin. A few days later, in the region of the Cauldrons of Elfin, a boy asked what was going on, since, without any warning, someone from the Marquise of Seltarian had suddenly appeared there. It was Count Fratel Nyron, Lord of Elpolin. He asked who had come, the firstborn or the second son. One of the men replied that he wasn't sure, but that they bore a symbol that only direct descendants of Seltarian could have. The Count then expressed concern, wondering if they weren't trying to drag his estate into Seltarian's internal affairs. He knew that the candidates for succession were creating a storm of conflict. His steward reminded him that there was an unwritten rule that other houses should not get involved in the dispute over the succession. The Count, wanting to avoid headaches, wished he didn't have to deal with this. When they finally opened the door to receive the visitor, the Count was surprised to see Kyle, Seltarian's 4th son, and was startled. He hadn't expected it to be Kyle Sarian, the famous 4th son. These words left Leonhardt somewhat displeased, but Kyle, keeping his cool, said that everything was fine and that the reception was normal. He admitted that he had been somewhat disorderly until recently, but after overcoming his illness, he reflected on his behavior and decided to change. The man was impressed to hear that Kyle had overcome his illness and asked if it was really true. Kyle confirmed it, saying that he was training in magic and had already formed the first circle, as well as trying to contribute to his family in any way he could. The man, thinking about the rumors he had heard, remembered that the 4th son was known as a hopeless troublemaker and a deluded loser. However, when he saw him in person, these rumors seemed completely false. Kyle seemed like a polite and determined boy, with a determined outlook and a commendable desire to help his family. The man concluded that someone had certainly spread strange rumors about Kyle. Now, he imagined that Kyle's father must have been very worried, but that he could now rest easy knowing that the first wizard had emerged from the renowned family of swordsmen. The Count commented that the Marquise of Seltarian should be very calm now, considering that the family's future looked very bright. However, he asked the reason for the visit, as Kyle shouldn't have come unannounced just to say hello. Kyle apologized for arriving unannounced, explaining that the Marquis was in a delicate situation due to the succession dispute, and he didn't want anyone to know about his movements. Count Myton agreed, saying that it made sense. Kyle explained that the reason for his visit was to buy grain from Elam, as it was the largest grain-producing area in the north. The Count was surprised, as he had expected something more complex than just buying grain. He commented that there was already a regular trade agreement with Seltarian for the sale of grain and asked if Kyle was suggesting buying even more. Kyle confirmed this, explaining that the purchase was for personal use, as he wanted to use the grain for magical research, but couldn't reveal the details of the research at the moment. He added that this wouldn't be a one-off purchase, purchase, as he intended to make regular purchases from now on. Kyle noted that Pelion had had a good harvest in recent years and, as there was a surplus of grain that they didn't know how to manage, he would like to buy this surplus stock. He asked what the budget would be for such a purchase, and then showed several gold coins. The Count was impressed to realize that Kyle was offering platinum coins. He wondered how someone so young could have so much money. Count Myton commented that there was no problem in selling the excess grain, but that it would be prudent to know what it would be used for. However, recognizing the confidentiality of a witch's research, he decided not to ask any more questions. Kyle thanked him for his understanding. The Count, still suspicious, asked where all that money came from, explaining that dealing with money of uncertain origin could cause a lot of problems, especially when the buyer was so young. Kyle reassured the Count that there was no need to worry, as his older brother Abel was financing everything. The Earl, surprised, asked if he was talking about Abel, and Kyle confirmed it. The Earl reflected that if Abel was willing to give Kyle so much money, it showed how close they were. He found that combination Abel, calm and composed, with the promising youngest son, Kyle much better than dealing with the second son. The Earl then decided that he could maintain a good relationship with Abel in the future. He commented that if Abel was supporting Kyle, he would also trust him and sell him anything Kyle wanted. They began to discuss prices, and the Count suggested 7 silver per sack of grain. Kyle, however, replied that 4 silver would be fair, saying that 7 silver for old grain was a bit much. He asked if the Count disagreed, noting that keeping the stock accumulated still entailed storage fees. He suggested that the Count clean it all up and sell it to him. The Count then proposed 6 silver, but Kyle insisted on 4.5 silver, arguing that, considering the storage costs, he deserved at least that much less. After much negotiation, they agreed on 5 silver per bag, and Kyle declared that they had made a good deal. Leon Hart, impressed, commented on Kyle's negotiating skills, asking if he had also learned this from books. Kyle, not knowing exactly how to answer, said yes, commenting that there was nothing the library couldn't teach him. In fact, he had learned these tactics by trading on online markets. Leon Hart then asked if buying grain was part of Kyle's plan to make money, as he had mentioned before. Kyle confirmed this, explaining that he bought the grain while it was cheap and intended to sell it when demand increased, making a profit. Leon Hart noted that the grain supply was very stable and that the estate already had enough stock to last a whole year. Even if Kyle sold the old grain, it was unlikely to be very profitable. Kyle then commented that it was a safe investment for stable times, but suggested that he had something else in mind for the future. Kyle explained that he was preparing for any eventuality, because anything could happen in that world. He knew that a great famine was on its way. According to the game's plot, after Seltarian's succession ceremony, an unprecedented climatic anomaly would cause this famine, causing grain prices to skyrocket. Even with all the money in the world, people wouldn't be able to buy food. At that point, no one would care whether the grain was new or old, and Kyle was sure of that because he knew the future. However, he wondered how he would explain this to Leon Hart, who was very stubborn. There was no way to explain everything to him now. Leon Hart, for his part, commented that everything Kyle had done so far had been for a good reason, and he believed that the same applied now. Leon Hart's favorability towards Kyle was at 50%, and Kyle was surprised, as it had been negative when they first met. Seeing this progress thrilled him. Urgel entered the room and informed him that Count Nyron had something to discuss with Kyle before dinner, and that he should take a moment to do so. The scene then changed, and Kyle commented that he had heard that the Count was looking for him. Count Myton Nyron said that he wanted to introduce Kyle to a special person. Kyle asked who this person might be, when suddenly a girl said hello to him. She introduced herself as Iris Nyron, Myton Nyron's daughter. Kyle was shocked. How could that woman be there at that moment? Who would have thought that he would be introduced to Iris Nyron in that place? It was then explained that Iris Nyron, with her beauty and 5% magical talent, had a large fan base in fantasy defense, especially in the early stages of the game, when levels were low. She was a reliable force. However, there was one big problem with Iris. Her characteristics included arrogance and contempt for the weak. Kyle remembered some of Iris's lines in the game, such as "all weaklings should kneel before me," and "if you want to meet me, bring me a jewel, and of course, I won't accept anything less than a diamond." She appreciated luxury and talented people, but her personality problems made her a difficult character to deal with. Towards the end of the game, with the abundance of S and SS rank mages, Iris, who was at a level, became less useful and was often discarded by players. Kyle thought she wasn't worth recruiting because of her off-putting personality. Count Myton said that Iris had turned 11 that year, and that, as there wasn't a big age difference between them, he thought they could become great friends. He added that, as well as being his daughter, Iris had a great talent for magic, and that, since Kyle was also studying magic, it would be great if they could learn together. Kyle thought that Iris's opinion seemed to be a little different from her father's. He then smiled and said it was a pleasure to meet her. He introduced himself as Kyle Centurion, the fourth son of the Marquis of Celtarian, and said he was looking forward to spending time together. At that moment, Kyle activated his mind's eye. The system revealed that her name was Iris Nyren, and her talents included Mana Companion and Magic Brain. Her characteristics included arrogance, contempt for the weak, appreciation of luxury, adoration of appearance, and a melancholic mentality. Her favorability was at -40, which didn't surprise Kyle. However, something surprised him: the Mana Companion talent. Kyle was amazed because, even though it was something he had never seen in the original game, he knew that Mana Companion was the #1 magical talent, something that only the best SS rank mages, who represented 0.01% of the population, possessed. Kyle was perplexed to see that Iris, a mage only ranked A in fantasy defense, possessed this talent. Kyle realized that Iris' situation was very similar to that of Abel and Urgel. He wondered if Iris had awakened a new potential. Although her personality traits made her an avoided character in the game, if she possessed an SSS level talent, that completely changed the situation. Kyle knew he couldn't miss this opportunity. Iris then asked Kyle if he was the fourth son of the last line of the Celtarian family succession, which would explain why she had never heard of him before. However, she was aware of Abel and Adolph's achievements. Iris commented that she had heard that Kyle was in the first circle of magic, while she had already reached the second circle. She wondered what they could do, since they seemed to be on different levels. Kyle was irritated, wondering why such a young girl had such a distorted personality. He replied that, yes, she was in the first circle, but it had only been 3 months since she had started learning magic. He reflected that he had managed to form the first circle twice as fast as her, which was impressive. He explained that he started practicing magic at the age of 13 because he suffered from an illness called Hermione, from which he had only recently recovered. Iris was impressed to hear that he had overcome the disease, but quickly said that she wasn't praising him. Iris's father, Myton Nyren, intervened, explaining that overcoming Hermione's disease required an extraordinary amount of magical power or aura, and those who succeeded were often called magical geniuses or knights. He pointed out that Kyle, at the age of 13, had overcome this serious illness and, with time, would become stronger and stronger. Myton added that he wanted Iris and Kyle to study together, as he believed they could learn and influence each other positively. Iris, however, maintained her arrogant stance, claiming that Kyle was still in the first circle, and questioned what she could learn from someone she considered inferior. Kyle, already familiar with her characteristic contempt for the weak, realized that Iris continually underestimated him, believing him to be much weaker than her. He thought that Iris's problematic personality needed to be corrected as soon as possible. Kyle decided that Iris would be the third talented person he would recruit. He replied that she shouldn't judge a book by its cover, and that he would prove that he wasn't weaker than her. On hearing this, Iris became shy, as Kyle was very close to her. She asked why he was so confident and how he could prove it. Kyle then challenged her to a one-on-one duel. If he lost, he would admit that he was weaker than her, but if he won, things would be very different. She accepted the challenge immediately. If he won, he would have to kneel before her. Her father was horrified by her attitude and asked her where she had learned that from. Naturally, she replied that she had read it in a novel. Kyle was also surprised, wondering what kind of book she was reading. Her father then commented that novels were not appropriate for her age, and that the book would be confiscated. She, in turn, replied that this would not happen. Kyle said that, regardless of her request, if he lost, he would accept any condition. Conan, confused, asked what Kyle meant by that, and he explained that if he won, she would have to accept him as her teacher and never look down on anyone inferior or weaker again. She accepted the challenge, confident that she wouldn't lose to a wizard of the first circle. Kaiton reflected on her daughter's problematic personality. Raised by a family that always praised her, she could be hated more and more if she carried on like this. Until then, Iris had no friends her own age, and her reputation in social circles was not good. Kyle, aware of this, knew that she needed to be taught a lesson. Conan commented that it would be good for Iris to experience defeat while she was still young. He encouraged Kyle to teach her a lesson. Kyle, smiling, realized that he now had her father's permission and assured her that there would be no need to worry. He really would teach her the lesson she needed. Irritated, Iris exclaimed, "How dare you try to teach me something? You're only a first circle wizard." It irritated her, but up close she realized that his face was rather handsome. Even so, she quickly reminded herself that he was still only in the first circle. With confidence, she affirmed that, no matter what, she would make him kneel. Curiously, despite her words, her impression of him had improved somewhat.